First Smoke family, we got a big podcast today. We got Todd McCormick on. We talk Haze, we talk genetics, we talk lost genetics. We talk trust and mistrust in the industry, and we dive into so many topics over this episode. This is for all you OGs and all you newcomers. So much information, so many books talked about, and so much weed knowledge. And if you want more knowledge and you want a discount, growgeneration.com, stores nationwide, but you get the discount online as well. And it doesn't matter if you want fave and lighting, if you want Grow Generation, if you're looking for drip nutrients, or whether you want to get hooked up with raw papers. All that's on fsotd.com, and you get the newest discount codes, and you get hooked up directly to the right site, where you can get the official raw papers, you get fave and hooked up, you get direct contact with the owner. Grow Generation stores, come on. Grow supplies, trap supplies, all the stuff you guys need. fsotd.com. Wait till you hear this guy, Todd.
I got busted for growing 4,116 plants in a Bel Air mansion in 1997, and it was proverbially across the street from Humbly Hills back in 1970. Keith Stroop, when he was a young lawyer, went to Hugh Hefner with this idea of founding NORML because he was a Raider-Nader. Ralph Nader was into consumer rights, and he saw the ability to use cannabis as basically a consumer right, an adult right. You can have knives, you can have guns, you can have cars. There's a lot of adult use items, whiskey, wine, cigarettes. Why draw the line at cannabis? My friend Aaron, who bailed me out of jail with DJ Pooh in 06, said to me, he goes, you know, you've lived a really crazy life because most people won't go debate the DEA and then see if they're bluffing and fly out to Holland, pick up your medicine, and then I smoked on the way back. What was innovative about Neville is he had the courage to sell seeds to America, and he had the audacity to advertise in High Times. And it was Greg saw his ad in High Times, and the guy that ended up turning in Neville, Raymond Anthony Cogo, he actually called the number in the High Times thing and struck up a conversation with Neville. And the whole thing was probably a trap. In 2012, I was getting the Cannabis Culture Award in Amsterdam along with Dr. Lester Grinspoon and, of all people, Sir Richard Branson. Really nice guy. I mean, he's in our second documentary, The Culture High.
Wow, that's an honor.
He launched it for us on his virgin.com blog, which was phenomenal for us. And then Netflix liked it so much that they translated our film into 15 languages and then showed it in 70 countries for 5 years.
First Smoke family, huge episode today. I'm excited. We've probably talked for 2.5 hours before this pod even started, and not just today. I've watched probably 3 podcasts. I've done my research. I'm really excited. I've sent DMs for about 2 years to this person, wanting to get them on so we could have this conversation. And some people always ask me, like, why haven't you had this person on yet? Or why you got to get this person on? I'm hunting down the OGs, and today we have one with us, Todd McCormick. Thank you for coming to First Smoke.
Thank you for having me on.
Bro, I mean, the deeper I dive into your history, it just keeps going. It's like some people, I can get to the story and hear it. When I get that story, I dive deeper and I'm like, well, what was his relationship with Sam the Skunkman then? And it just keeps going. And the strains and the genetics, something I want to start with. You've had some of the most insane smoke sessions. And when I say that, I mean, you've been in a circle passing a joint of either something you grew or something special. What was the biggest, like, I can't believe I'm smoking with these people right now?
Well, I got busted for growing 4,116 plants in a Bel Air mansion in 1997. And it was proverbially across the street from Humbly Hills, which is where Hugh Hefner lived. And knowing Keith Stroop, who's the founder of NORML, I know the history of NORML really, really well. And I've worked with NORML. I've been around the NORML office for a very long time. And one night I was out and with my other friend, Bill, who's kind of famous himself, and we bumped into Hef. And Hef knew who I was from the news and basically invited me, basically grabbed me by the arm and started telling me about how he helped found NORML back in 1970. Keith Stroop, when he was a young lawyer, went to Hugh Hefner with this idea of founding NORML because he was a Raider-Nader. He was a guy that was Ralph Nader was into consumer rights, and he saw the the ability to use cannabis as basically a consumer right, an adult right. Like you can have knives, you can have guns, you can have cars. There's a lot of adult use items, whiskey, wine, cigarettes. Why draw the line at cannabis? And he took his idea to Hef, Hef liked it, gave him the initial seed money, and founded the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. So fast forward, and he's telling me all this while we're standing there meeting him, and I say to him, hey, I've known Keith for years. And he says, oh, why don't you guys come over and have dinner? And I was like, sure. So he flew Keith out, and we had dinner together. It was just me, Keith, my girlfriend, Hef, his assistant, Joni, who's now passed away. And after dinner, we went and sat in the backyard, and it was just us and smoking weed, sitting at one of the tables. And I was thinking to myself, oh my fucking God, I can't believe this is where I'm sitting. And it was amazing. I mean, he was a really nice guy, and he actually was into eating cannabis. He didn't smoke too much. He ate his own cookies, and he had a couple friends who made cookies for him. And that way he could sneak his cannabis use into board meetings, and he could be sitting with representatives from liquor companies who are advertising heavily in Playboy, and he'd be there with his glass of fucking milk and his cookies getting stoned the whole time. And I asked him, who turned you on to cannabis? He said it was the Beats back in the late 50s when they started coming around the Chicago mansion and turning them on. It was the Allen Ginsberg, who had a very famous pot is fun sign in the early 60s, and they were turning him on to it. And in order to not get in trouble from the smell, they were baking it like Alice B. Toklas brownies and putting it in cookies. He liked Nestle Toll House cookies with weed. And yeah, it was a moment I was thinking, wow. And then after I got out of prison, which is always a funny thing to say, I ended up producing parties at the Playboy Mansion for 3 years. 2007, 8, and 9, we were raising money for the Marijuana Policy Project. And it wasn't really about the party so much. It was about me being able to call up somebody and say, hey, I'd like to invite you to the Playboy Mansion. We're trying to raise awareness for marijuana legalization. You know, would you listen to me for a minute? And usually if you're like inviting them to the Playboy Mansion, they'll take your call and listen to you for a minute. And it was about organizing. And like Tommy Chong, great guy, he would help me organize. But the first year I did it, he came to me and said, listen, Todd, you know I love you and I'm behind you. But please don't expect me to come to the party and stand there and sign autographs for 3 hours. It's just not what I want to do. But he would come to the pre-planning meetings and help me. Like, he helped actually make it happen and bring other celebrities in. Like, behind the scenes, he's an absolute awesome human being. I mean, I got nothing but love for Tommy. When I did the THC Expo in 2009 at the LA Convention Center, I was really stoned, which is typical. And I had this really instantaneous idea I was doing like an environmental part. I had different themes like paraphernalia and nutrients and glass and seeds. And the whole thing was like a little department store of weed for me. And I had this bright idea to maybe put Tommy Chong's electric hot rod in the display because there's hemp in it and it's electric and it's his environmental side. And so I wasn't thinking, and I called him up and I was like, hey, Tommy, do you still have your electric hot rod? And he was on the phone. He says, yeah, I do. And I was like, I wasn't thinking it through. And I was like, can I borrow it? And he got quiet for like a good minute, like a long minute, like one of those like 2 a.m. minutes in front of the microwave where you're waiting for that thing to finish and it's taking forever. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I should have said something. I should have explained myself. And he comes back, he goes, yeah, where is it you're trying to go? I said, no, Tommy, I'm not trying to go anywhere. I was going to put it at I'm renting the LA Convention Center. I'm going to do the THC Expo, and I just want to put it on display because your whole environmental side, hemp side, I think it'd be nice to portray. And he goes, oh, wow, I thought you just wanted to borrow my car. I said, you know what? I didn't really know I could call you up, borrow your hot rod. He goes, well, looks like you can. I was like, oh,
that's
dude.
epic.
So,
he wanted you. He was like, maybe he just wants to borrow it.
He thought I just wanted to borrow his freaking hot
Drive
rod.
around LA.
Yeah. And the morning it was held by a company called Hippie Motors, who were super cool. And they brought the car down for me on Saturday morning. And Tommy came down nice and early to see what the fuck I was doing with the LA Convention Center and stayed the whole day. I have the most beautiful photos of Tommy. He was so proud. Because we went through the same halfway house up in Hollywood, up off Western, and you know we were both in prison at the same time in the feds. I got busted for Bel Air, and he got busted for the bongs. And I met him in '97 or '98. It's really weird. I have no memory of meeting Tommy, but I've had his number in my phone forever. And I bet you if you sat him down and said, "When did you meet Todd?" You go, "I don't know." Can't remember. How long you known him? Oh, a long time. But I don't know how we met, but we've been friends for a quarter century.
And that's deep into the journey when this happened. I mean, because your journey starts really early, where you're talking about Sam the Skunk Man, Mel Frank. I mean,
I met Sam in '94 and Mel Frank in '96.
Could you dive us into, Todd, your part of your life when this thing starts to really, when you go head deep, like you're just, this is what my life's going to be?
Believe it or not, it goes way back, because when I was a little kid, I had cancer, a form of histiocytosis X called hand school or Christian disease. I had it 10 locations. I had it in my spine. My spine is fused together. My first 5 vertebrae are fucking one. I had it 3 more locations in my skull, twice in my right ear. I had it 2 locations in my left hip. I was in a wheelchair for almost 8 months. And then I had it again in between my left lung and my heart. I have a huge scar over here. And then I had it a 10th time in my arm when I was like 15 and went through chemo and radiational therapy and the whole thing. And way back in '79, my mother was sitting in a waiting room, and there was a Good Housekeeping magazine, and it had cancer issue on it. And she picked it up and was reading through it. And in the doctor's column, there was information about marijuana being given to cancer patients. So she went to my pediatrician, who's a really cool guy, Peter Smith. And she said, what do you think? And at the time I had cancer 9 times in 8 years. And he said, to my mom, it's not your worst option. You have nothing to lose. So on the way home, she slipped me a joint and she said, sip it like it's a straw. And on the way home from Rhode Island Hospital, I smoked a joint. And when we got home, I was fucking high. And she's like, what do you want? And I was like, sauteed spinach. And she's like, oh, you definitely are high. I was in a Popeye. What could I say? And little did I know the metaphor of Popeye, getting his spinach through the pipe until years later. A lot of people would say that the spinach was a metaphor for his cannabis use, and which is really wild. But that really was huge. And then the next thing happened maybe a few weeks, few months. I kind of can't remember what the time frame, but another child was going through, I was using a chemotherapy called methotrexate, and another kid was going through it, and my doctor asked me if I'd talk to the other kid. And on the way through the hallway, I said to him, you don't want me to tell him about marijuana? And he was like, oh, no. And I was like, so you want me to lie? And he's like, I didn't tell you to lie. I said, well, if you don't want me to mention something, that's kind of lying, right? And he turned me around and walked me back to my mom. And it was like so fast, my mother was like, what's the matter? And I said, he wants me to lie. And he says, no, I don't. I said, yes, you do. You don't want me to talk about marijuana. And my mom's like, oh. And he's like, you see the problem? She's like, yeah. He's like, this isn't going to work. And she's like, I understand. And
because it implicates her and him.
Oh, well, it's 1979.
Yeah.
They would have taken me away and the whole thing. And so my mom takes me home, and she holds up a bag of zigzags, and she goes, what is this? I said, zigzag. She goes, no. You don't know what it is, and you've never seen it before. And then she holds up a bong. She goes, what's this? This is your bong. She goes, no, you don't know what it is, and you've never seen it before. And
I was my type of mom.
I was like, what the fucking mom? And she's like, look, they'll take you away. Okay. They'll arrest me and take you away. Doesn't matter if you're sick. Doesn't matter if you're using it. It doesn't matter. They'll just take you away. And I was like, oh. She's like, it was really kind of an us and them. And I think shortly after that, she handed me my first Pink Floyd album. I was like, listen to this, kid.
This goes with this.
Yes, it really was. And realistically, it changed my world. And that moment, I'll never forget being in the hallway and holding his hand, because he was that much taller than me, and thinking, this is all bullshit, And then when I went home, my mom had a little book called A Child's Garden of Grass. And when it was like page 141, it has a little chapter that says, The Dangerous Effects of Grass. And you flip to it, it has a little poem, and it said, a child should always speak what's true and speak when he is spoken to, and behave mannerly at table, at least as far as he is able. And I read it, and I flipped the page, and it's blank. And on the right page, it says the dangerous effects of grass are: 1, getting busted. Turn the page, the chapter's over.
I love that.
Oh, never. And when I was reading it, I used to sneak this book out of her bookshelf because it was such a forbidden topic. And I realized I wanted to learn more about it, but it was prohibited to learn about. I couldn't go to school and ask about it. I couldn't, everywhere you went. And when I was 12, they gave me another motorcycle, and I used to split and get high and go to the library. I remember the first time my grandma said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the library. She said, don't you lie to me. I said, Grandma, I'm actually going to the library. I'm not telling her I'm trying to find books about marijuana, but I was really going to the library.
I got a lot of research to do.
It was absolutely true. And that's where I found Marijuana, the First 12,000 Years by Ernest Abel.
Cultivators, Under Canopy Lighting is changing the game. And with that, Faven Under Canopy Lighting. They're one of our premier sponsors, and it's a brand we truly believe in. If you want to check out favenlighting.com, you can get all the answers to what Under Canopy is and is how it's changing the game. And guess what? You're family, so we hook you up. The code is FSOTD, and you get hooked up with Faven Lighting. They put together a full layout of how you would set your facility or grow room up using their Under Canopy lighting. Whether you're using CMH, double-ended, fluorescents, LEDs, it doesn't matter. Faven Lighting has you covered. Go to favenlighting.com, use the code FSOTD, get hooked up, and change your grow game. Come on, cultivators.
And I'll tell you, I was a little kid, and I opened the book, and in the introduction on the first page, it has a line. It says, "It sprouts from the earth, not meekly, not cautiously in suspense of where it is and what it may find, but defiantly, arrogantly, that whatever the circumstance, it has the stamina to survive." And I read that 1,000 times because I wanted to be that little seed. I wanted that confidence. And that book was almost intoxicating to me. And that's where I first learned about hemp and paper and the use of cannabis and the invention of paper in China by Hemp and Mulberry, and how they kept it a secret for 900 years. And it's huge. I mean, it blew me away. And that's why, fast forward 1993, I was in a head shop at San Diego and I got Jack Herrera's book. I took it home and I read it and I was just floored. This is information that you can't find. You didn't find in schools. It was very verboten or taboo. You couldn't bring up. Even if you ask about it, the people you asked didn't know because they were all bought the bullshit story. And I was blown away by Jack's book. And I called the number on the back and I asked if I could come up and meet him because I wanted to say thank you. And they told me they were doing the 1994 Hemp and Health Initiative. No, excuse me. At the time, it was just the Hemp Initiative. It didn't become the Hemp and Health Initiative until I met Jack, and then we refiled in 95.
What book by Jack?
The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And his first book was called Grass. It came out in the early 70s. It was really just a coloring book that was kind of fun and whimsical. And years into it, when he was trying to sell the book at local head shops, he brought it into one head shop in Van Nuys and met a gentleman named Ed Astaire. Captain Eddie went by. And the two guys, Jack and Ed, became best friends and started doing a lot of acid together. And this sounds weird, but people would come up to Jack and say, "Oh, do you know they used to use hemp to make ropes? Or they used to use hemp to make flags, and it used to be our tents, and did you know any of this?" And Jack was like, "The fuck are you talking about?" But as he looked into it more, he realized, holy shit. And then one day on acid, he had this revelation that hemp wasn't just for paper and fabrics and fuel. It was the best source of hemp for all these things. Before we were cutting down trees, we were using hemp. You know, when you look at hemp, ship sails, they were all made of hemp. All the paints and varnishes, the maps and Bibles, the clothing on what Columbus sailed over on was hemp. Even what's called oakum. Do you know what oakum is? So oakum is hemp fibers dipped in tar, and they would mat them together and put them between the planks of the ship so that when it would harden, it would seal up and it would keep the water out. Kind of important, you know?
Oh, massively, especially at that time. And then you even spoke to the complex amino acids that are in the hemp seed.
Oh, I could get to that, man. We have a whole chapter on hemp seed nutrition.
But the plant produces on all avenues. It's
amazing.
Yes.
Everything I'm wearing right now, even the Levi's jeans, are a third hemp. These are with a company called Outer Known, and they're 72% cotton and 28% hemp.
If I could ask you this, what's the reason you think hemp never became the industry it should have been?
It did, actually. There's a really great book by Jack Fraser from the early 70s called The Marijuana Farmers, and none of them are marijuana farmers. It's about hemp farming. And realistically, I was sitting across from Dan Rather one day. He did Bill Maher's show, and afterwards we had dinner, and Dan sat across from me and Bill was to the left of me, and Dan said, "Nice to meet you." And I said, "Nice to meet you too, sir. Are you a history buff?" He said, "Kid, I'm old enough to be history. What do you got?" And Bill made a joke. He said, "It's a trick question." He said, "How can it be a trick question?" I said, "Okay." Columbus sailed over. He found a plant he didn't know existed. He couldn't find the plant that was responsible for the cultural evolution of Eurasia. What were those two plants? And he looks at me and goes, "Well, tobacco for sure." He goes, "But responsible for the cultural evolution of Eurasia? Don't you think that's a little lofty?" I said, "Well, was paper important to our cultural evolution?" I said, yeah. I said, what about clothing? He said, yeah. I said, what about ropes and sails? Yeah. I said, what about all that great art that depicts our culture? Yeah. I said, it's painted on canvas. Yeah. I said, do you know the etymology of canvas? Do you know where it came from? And Bill laughed and he said, I told you it was a trick question, because Bill's heard all this shit before. And he said, no. I said, well, all canvas came from cannabis. And cannabis was what was responsible for the invention of paper, for the first fabrics. There's never been cotton ropes. There's never been cotton sails. All of the paints and varnishes before we had synthetics and polymers, hemp seed oil with pigments. I said, do you know what oakum is? He said, no, but I suspect you're going to tell me. I said, yeah. So I described it to him. And I said, you don't think that that's responsible for the cultural evolution? And he said, why don't I know any of this? I said, because unfortunately, people like you are too busy reporting on Britney Spears and Justin Bieber, and instead of what really matters. And he said, Todd, that's really hard to take. I said, well, I said, we know too much about celebrities that mean nothing, and not enough about the history that would really free us all from the tyranny of oppression. And yeah, he was blown away.
Yeah, I mean, especially as a reporter, and he's regarded as like, a world-renowned top-shelf reporter. Yeah. So for him to also then be taken back by that, I mean, most people don't know that, Todd, and that's why this is such an important interview for me, is just being able to have these conversations with guys like you and get it out to our younger audience, right? Because some of the guys in their 40s and 50s have read the books and have talked. Not a lot of the younger generation is in tune with who got us here and why are we growing these strains that actually don't look like they did 30 years ago, right? A name that comes up a lot is Sam the Skunkman. He had such a chapter that the evolution of his breeding is in everything today, damn near.
In my humble opinion, he is the hero of the modern cannabis story, and flat up, absolutely. His real name's David Watson. And David Watson met his wife of now 54 years in Hollywood. They grew up in Hollywood High. And in 1970, they sold all their worldly possessions and they split to go take the hippie trail. They flew to London. They hitchhiked London to Morocco because a hippie needs hash. And then he went from Morocco to Germany, and then from Germany all the way across through Pakistan, Afghanistan, into the Hindu Kush Mountains. He showed me invitations he had to dinners in Nepal back in 1971. And they went through all there. He collected genetics, and then he went south and lived near Goa, down south of the peninsula, for almost a year on the beach with his wife. They started an import-export business doing fabrics while he was collecting genetics. And after about a year, maybe a year and a half, they went home to California and they moved up to Santa Cruz. And just so happened, he moved onto the same street as the old surfer that he refers to as G, who created original Haze, which was a little bit of what we're smoking. That unique smell in the air is the original Haze.
It smells so lovely in here. Just to break up the combo, we just lit up some Haze OG. Or OG Haze.
Yeah, I call it OG Haze.
OG Haze. And I mean, the bag that Todd brought is it's so reminiscent of the Haze that I know as Haze as, early 2000s smoker, right? Mm-hmm. I never really had the amnesias and things like that. It was more of these profiles that I was used to.
Right.
And that we lusted over, to be totally honest.
I've known Soma for a very, very long time, 30 years now. And when I got out of prison and I went to Amsterdam and I went to go see Soma, I said, you got some Haze? He looked at me, he goes, you're not going to like it. And I said, why? He goes, not enough Haze in it. And I was like, oh, that's some bullshit. And I was like, where'd the Haze go? He said, Neville sold his plants to Scotty. Scotty moved away and Neville's gone. And I was like, oh. That sums it up. And he was like, Scotty's who you call Shanty Baba. But when I met him, Scott Blakely was just Arian's assistant in 94. And I've known him as Scott. I call him Scotty, but.
That's a crazy nickname to get, is your name's like, just to say like as all cool, but Scott to Shanty Baba, that is an epic nickname to have.
I have no idea where it came from. The Shanty Baba cool. thing. I have no idea. I've liked Scott. I mean, Scotty and I've always had very positive interactions. But he split and in the end of the 90s. And but yeah, Haze is so.
This is great weed, Todd.
It's funny, but the way I got it is in 2012, I was getting the Cannabis Culture Award in Amsterdam along with Dr. Lester Grinspoon and, of all people, Sir Richard Branson, another strange place to find myself. Well, he's done a lot of work with the Global Commission on Drug Policy, and he's been an advocate for legalizing not just cannabis, but drugs around the world for a long time. And he accepted to receive the award. I mean, if you go to YouTube, type in Todd McCormick, Richard Branson, you can see us sitting there for a half hour talking about legalizing weed. And anyone watching can go watch it too. And really nice guy. I mean, he's in our second documentary, The Culture High. When I was with him getting the award, I asked him, I said, did you happen to see The Union, the business behind getting high? He smiled. He goes, yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I said, ooh, would you maybe be in our next documentary? And he said, maybe. I said, well, maybe it's better than no. And he was like, yeah, it's a lot better than no. And then he said yes. And he liked it so much when we showed it to him, he launched it for us on his virgin.com blog on October 1st, 2014, which was phenomenal for us. I mean, you can't get a billionaire to do whatever he doesn't want, you know? So we were blown away. And then Netflix liked it so much that they translated our film into 15 languages and then showed it in 70 countries for 5 years.
I had seen it and then liked it so much, I bought the DVD online.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, dude, if I support something, I'm totally invested in it. I understand the hard work that goes into, especially something like that. I mean,
yeah, it's polished.
Bro, it would damn near make you cry at some points, you know.
The beginning does.
Yeah.
People get broken up seeing the dog get shot and people get busted over an eighth of weed. We had a hard time getting that clip. They didn't want to release it either. But getting it back in a sense to, it's easy to jump around, and my apologies, but the way I got the Haze was at that event. Skunkman Sam came to it, and I went outside with him and I said, hey, will you sell me the original Haze seeds that you sold Neville in 1985? And he looks at me, he's like 6'5", and he looks down and he says, I never sold any original Haze seeds to Neville in 1985. And I was like, I didn't know what the fuck to ask at that point. And I was like,
well, good to meet you.
Yeah. Well, no, I've known him since 94 at that point. So we've been friends for a long time, but he threw me a curveball because I thought Neville got the seeds in 85. So I just stood there and he was like, he says, I think you want the seeds I saved for myself and I won't sell to anybody. I said, oh yeah, those are definitely what I need. So he said, get your best hash and come over in the morning. And I said, I did. So he told me this really interesting story about how when he came back from India, which is where he just left off, and he moved down the street from this surfer named G who created Haze. And one of the things that I took away being friends with Rob Clark, Skunkman Sam, and Mel Frank, they're not just breeders, they're preservers. They're into preservation. So when David got the seeds from the 69 batch, he liked them the best. That was the original three-way combination. The way he explained it is in 1970, 71, 72, 3, 4, 5, up to 78, they would breed something else with it to try to improve it, increase yield, maybe make it faster. By the end of the 70s, Haze was no longer, it was washed out. But because he was a seed saver, he still had the 1969 original combination, because when he came back from India, he had all of these original hashish producing areas genetics. And a lot of them we now know contain thiols, THIOLS. Thiols are what is responsible for the smell on a skunk's ass. It's responsible for that nasty acrid smell on fruits and vegetables when they start to go bad. Humans can actually detect it in parts per trillion because we have a subconscious programming to fucking avoid it because it can make us sick. And it's also in garlic. It's also on hops. What makes beer smell a bit skunky. And it's also on cannabis. And when he came back from India, a majority of the cannabis he had made thiols. And that's where he picked up the nickname Skunkman, because all this shit smelled like shit. And then as he got there, he started breeding. There's a really good article that he wrote. It was written in 1978. It was published in 1979 in a LSD magazine called Blotter. And it's titled Sun, Soil, Seeds, and Soul. Because it was the 70s. And if you didn't have a little soul, you just weren't with it. So the thing is amazing. I think it would go over the heads of 90% of the people that consider themselves breeders these days because it's so fucking deep. But what he was trying to do is explain to his hippie friends how to go from Landrace to cultivar. Phenomenal. This is how he created Skunk One.
That's like making the wheel. Like, I mean, yes, there were modes of transportation, but it changes everything.
This is why I think he's the hero in the modern cannabis story, because he created Skunk One and released it in 76. It's a combination of Afghan crossed with Colombian gold. And that one was skunk that smelled skunky. Well, then he was an acid eater, and he had this really acid dream that he could create a relatively true breeding variety of cannabis, because he wanted his friends to be able to breed the seeds together and not suffer inbreeding depression or drop off or any of that. He wanted the quality to be uniform and consistent. And one day I was on Skype with him, and I asked him, I said, how did you create a relatively true breeding variety of cannabis? He was very humble, and he said, Todd, I didn't. Nature did. I just had to combine enough plants and test the progeny to figure out what worked. That's breeding. And I was just like, you're amazing.
First Smoke family, we're a grow generation where we get hooked up with grow supplies, trap supplies, lighting, nutrients, whether you're cloning on a Sunday or whether you're trapping on a Monday. It's growgeneration.com. Stores also nationwide. But if you want to get hooked up, we have a code. It's our family code. It's First Smoke 10. No matter if you're in store or online, you get hooked up like family, just like we are. Growgeneration.com, grow stores nationwide.
And he released Skunk 1 in 76. And on the mountain in Santa Cruz at the time, original Haze would come down end of November, beginning of December, if you're lucky. He releases Skunk 1, which is 2/3 tropical, 1/3 Afghan. The Colombian gold and the Acapulco gold, both pretty equatorial, and the Afghan, pretty northern. It's what gave it its body and its quicker flowering times, but then the fruitiness and the fruits, because most of the tropical varieties don't have the thiols. And I'll explain that. You actually have the book Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany by Rob that explains that almost everything around the world are escaped cultivars from humans, because it all started in like the China Hindu Kush mountain range and then spread as humanity spread. And all of these areas, like there is no North American cannabis. It's not indigenous to the North or South American continents. It came with Columbus. And this is why the first laws on cannabis in this country were actually in 1619, saying that farmers had to grow it. 10% of their land had to be dedicated to hemp because they needed it for their ropes, their tents, their fabrics, everything that they needed. And the problem they were having is the colonial settlers were growing tobacco to trade with the ships, but then having to give all their money back because the ships were bringing the European hemp that they needed for their ropes and their sails and getting civilized. So they mandated that, hey, you got to grow some of this too. It's a national security that we need hemp. So the first laws on cannabis were actually that you mandated how to grow it, and you could pay your taxes with cannabis hemp up until probably for a couple hundred years, till I think the mid 1800s, if you look at our history books. There wasn't a cotton gin until the 1790s. So if you look back at history, what we were really growing, what slaves were brought here to do, wasn't pick cotton, it was to break hemp, period. There's no two ways about it, because all of the ships, it wasn't cotton sails, wasn't cotton ropes, wasn't cotton clothing. There was no cotton gin until 1790 something. It was hemp that was what our cloth was. Hemp, cannabis hemp is really what is responsible for a lot of our evolution and our ability to actually make it in this very wilderness continent, you know?
Wow. And so to dive into Sam the Skunkman's journey a little bit, when he was moving through Afghanistan, India, and that whole region,
Pakistan,
so the Hindu Kush Mountains, and he's traveling around, he's just collecting genetics.
Mind you, it was pre-Russian invasion.
Wow. What do you think those genetics were like? Were those what we would consider landrace today, or would that be more hybridized?
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
No, well, you know, when you go back and look at these areas of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Hindu Kush Mountains, they're traditional cannabis regions. This is where cannabis is from. We didn't bring it there. This is where Mother Nature put it. And this is also where you had the origin of things like temple ball hashish. Mm-hmm. And I get a little miffed by, you know, the hash makers today. I mean, I love Frenchie. He and I were very good friends. He used to come up to my house up in Oakland all the time. But just because you roll your water hash into a ball does not make it temple ball. You know, I mean, this used to be people that would go out into the fields when it was fresh and rub the plants, get it on their hands, rub it off. It would turn into balls. It would be like live resin in a way because it wasn't put through water. It didn't have like the terpenes stowed away. Yeah. And this was temple ball. Mm-hmm. I mean, and when you look at that, it was phenomenal. And he went back to the birthplace of cannabis and enjoyed it. And that's where a lot of where he got his education was, from sadhus and the hash makers. And, you know, he tells a joke about he was getting hashish from one of the guys in Afghanistan that bring hash, and he asked him for some of the marijuana, and he said the guy looked at me like I was a pile of shit. And I said, why do you want the marijuana? And he said, well, I want the seeds. And then he was like, oh, okay, I thought you wanted the marijuana. And David asked him why. He goes, well, it's for women and slaves. And David, he goes, it stuck with me forever. And
because it's looked upon as like
hashish was it was the refined.
Yes,
you don't smoke
high
anything
potency,
but
high quality refined product versus
you want the barrel
trimmings,
the cannabis.
Yeah,
what's the matter with you? But when he told him he wanted the seeds, then the guy understood. Oh, okay, and he got him some. And it's funny because David and I are good friends. And last time I was with him, he told me I could buy the remaining collection of Cultivator's Choice, which is sacred seeds to Cultivator's Choice. And he has his genetics going all the way back to the early 70s. He's never lost a seed. And he made a comment about the Hindu Kush he has. He goes, this is the worst smelling cannabis I ever grew in my life. He goes, maybe you'll love it. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, it sounds like total shit.
That sounds amazing.
I know, that's what I said too.
That sounds amazing.
And but that'll happen in the next little while. And I feel like
Todd.
it's incredible.
That's an honor.
You know, the whole thing has been, in all bluntness, I mean, I love Mel Frank. Him and I have been best friends since we met. He's from Massachusetts. I'm from Rhode Island. We're a couple salty New Englanders, and we get along great. And it was really funny how I met Mel Frank. He was at Positronics, and I was working there with old Ed Holloway, who turned 80 that year. His story is phenomenal. He was one of the aeronautical engineers who broke the speed of sound out of Edwards Air Force Base in the 50s. And in the 60s, had an early retirement. His wife was hitting the bottle, and he told me that he left her everything but a couple of his favorite airplanes, and he started flying around the equator to collect genetics. Started growing cannabis in the 60s, and he was one of the first to start smuggling cannabis to Amsterdam in 1974 when they opened it up for coffee shops, and the Milkveg, which is a big discotheque club in the middle of Amsterdam, love the place, opened up and started allowing people to import hash and grass in the place. It's wild, like cutting bricks open with saws and the whole thing. But this is when Bernard Brunning started the Mellow Yellow coffee shop, and when Hank DeVries started the Bulldog, and both good friends. And old Ed started coming over, and the young hippies didn't know shit about growing cannabis. So he started teaching them how to grow seedless cannabis, and really changed the world for them. And Bernard Brunning gives him a lot of respect, because Bernard was one of the first people on the scene with the Mellow Yellow, having to buy import stuff. And Ed came along and taught him how to really do it. And
wow.
And then which is where it also brings us back to Skunkman, because being on the West Coast, old Ed was living in California and Oregon. He knew of Skunkman Sam. And in about 83, the beginning of 83, they sent this guy who's now deceased, Michael Rich, over to California to get some of the seeds from Skunkman Sam of this Skunk One. He brought them back. They grew it in the summer of 83. And as Bernard would tell the story, it was the best cannabis they ever grew in their life. People would pull it out of their hands. It was just nothing like the stuff they had before. Mm. And it was funny because I was sitting making clones with old Ed Holloway one day in the back of Positronics, listening to him tell me stories. And I had a different respect for David Watson after meeting old Ed, because old Ed, turned 80 that year, and he had a history going back to this with this guy to the early 80s, and had nothing but love and respect for him. And he had clones in his hand, and I said to him, "What did you do with all the genetics that you were growing before you met, David?" He looked at me and goes, and then he goes to cut another cutting, and I was like, "Really?" And he goes, "They were nothing like what he had." He said, "Todd, you got to realize, when he came over, he brought Skunk One, California Orange, Hindu Kush, Afghani One, Durban Poison, Early Girl, Early Pearl, Indie Sat." He revolutionized the whole thing. All that modern cannabis came from California. The Afghani One and the Durban came from
Sam
Mel
the
Frank.
Skunkman.
Right, but Mel Frank and Skunkman Sam had been friends since the 70s. So he had the Afghani One and the Durban from Mel Frank going back to the 70s. He got California Orange, never took credit for it, but he collected it. He got the Haze from down the street from G, never took credit for it, but preserved it. Some of the ones he did create.
So it was Sam who brought the genetics back, and then him and Mel linking up to then change cannabis as we know it today, or what?
Well, I think Mel Frank, I love him. He's, through his books and what he's done, he's a huge influence. I mean, but he provided the Durban poison and the Afghani one to David, Skunkman Sam, and Skunkman Sam brought it all to Holland in 1984, 85. And that's when he sold some seeds to Neville. And Neville benefited from him not wanting to be ratted out. So, I've met Neville. We've played chess before. I was gonna do a long interview with him in my magazine. He was quick to take credit for other people's work. There is no Dutch word for the word skunk, for instance. And I was sitting with Ben Dronkers once in his kitchen above the Hash Museum, and he showed me a little Polaroid of him next to a plant, and it said skunk written under it in red. And he said, this is from before David came. And I looked at him and I said, really? I said, is there even a Dutch word for skunk? He looked at me. He said, skunk. I said, no, it's still English. And I said, have you ever seen a skunk out?
Skunk in a Dutch accent to try to make it. That's so great. Hilarious. Though. That's great.
And then I said to him, have you ever seen a skunk outside of Pepe Le Pew on a cartoon? He's like, no, I don't think so. I said, do they even have them in your zoos? And he says, I don't think so. I said, can I tell you why? He said, sure. I said, because it's a North American animal. There are no skunks in Europe. So I find it hard to believe that you would call something you would have no reference to. And this is also why skunk in England is called cheese, because thiols are a compound on cheese when it's going funky. So what they perceive as that skunky thiol is cheese to them. And he looked at me.
It's a skunk.
He looked at me. He lit a cigarette and he says, you know too much.
See, just like you said, it's a lot of credit taking. If we can go into that, then it's so interesting. The deeper we dive into the history of Amsterdam and the Dutch genetics, a lot of Americans.
Oh, it all comes home. And unfortunately, I mean, I live there. I have a lot of friends that are Dutch, and I love my friends.
Not to take anything away from anybody.
No, Simon Schmidt, Serious Seeds, super solid guy, super great company.
AK-47, right?
The Cali, the Chronic. I got none but love for Simon. I used to work with Serious Seeds in 96. Yeah, I helped him grow seedless pot around Amsterdam with a guy named Gene. And I used to get to clean the seeds because Simon trusted me. And he used to take me falconing and teach me about falconing because he's also a falconer. I got love for a lot of my friends, man. Hank DeVries is a hero of mine. What he's done with the Bulldogs, amazing. Bernard Brunning has been an incredible activist. Even Ben. I mean, Ben and I have been friends for a long time. I don't see him much anymore. He's the one who gave me the Cannabis Culture Award with Richard Branson back in 2012. He has the most amazing museums in the world. The Barcelona Museum is second to none when it comes to depicting cannabis history. I would recommend anybody check it out, especially if you're at Spanibus. Go over, it's worth it. There's a lot of great people. But at the same time, there was a lot of xenophobia and a lot of the Americans coming in, they were freaked out about. And I mean, even Neville.
They still are.
For sure.
There's definitely, because I've asked this question so many times, Todd, about like, why are there not successful cannabis companies in California or let's say the US working together with some of these Dutch companies aside from genetics? Because it's like even the genetics they're putting out that are California based strains aren't the best California strains. It's like, why don't you just line up with the guys or align with the guys who actually have those genetics and produce something cool together? There is this line in the sand still that when I went over there, I felt where it's like, you're an outsider. We're outsiders. 100%. Yeah. And I hate that.
I was fairly well received. I have a lot of very good friends. I had an office at Positronics, and I mean, wow. I was there for a year. I love the place. I absolutely fucking adore Amsterdam.
One of the best places on earth, in my opinion.
In my opinion as well. Although it's changed a lot, and the Christian-leaning government, I think, is negative towards the liberal views of Amsterdam, and it's kind of hurting what Amsterdam used to be, which was about personal liberty and the ability to be yourself. And I will always admire the Netherlands on that level. At the same time, in the mid 80s, when Sam came over with the seeds, guys like Mel Frank and Seattle Greg of Northern Lights and David Watson, he didn't even use his real name. He used his nickname Sam from Skunkman Sam, and his other nickname from the LSD parties was Jingles, because he was this big, tall guy who used to wear a jester's cap and it used to jingle. So he'd be jingling all around the party. So when he went there, he just did Sam and Jingles backwards, which was Selnage or whatever the fuck. non-word that it was, and he introduced himself as Sam Selnich. And my Dutch friends didn't know he was David Watson for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, and until the International Hemp Association and Hortifarm started hitting. But David is a phenomenal story because he was so into cannabis in the 70s and watching Roxanne Labs push what was dronabinol, or a synthetic version of THC, Marinol, through the regulatory process. And he saw that there was an opportunity to make a generic equivalent to dronabinol, which is just, guess what? THC. So he was country shopping and realized that if he filed the forms in the Netherlands, he could actually create a pharmaceutical research company that would destroy all the cannabis, but was there to collect genetics, do research on the genetics, and comply with the Dutch law. But that's how he got the license to start Hortifarm, which stood for Horticultural Pharmacy. Hortifarm.
The shopping spree begins. Cultivators globally trust Drip Hydro. Whether your nutrient solution is in powder form or liquid form, Drip's got you covered. And you know we treat you like family. First Smoke 10 is the discount code. Whether you're in store or online at driphydro.com, doesn't matter. We get you hooked up. driphydro.com. Clean, effective, affordable. First Smoke family, no matter the guest, you know we're rocking Raw and Elements papers. Whether it's the Elements king size wide, the Raw fatties without the crease, so you still get the king size wide, but with unbleached and uncreased. Something we've been loving on the show is the Raw king size blacks. And when we're lighting up, the Phoenix. This is awesome. Flintless residue, windscreen with a poker. No matter what products you like from Raw, you can check out genuineraw.com, and that gets you to all their affiliate links to purchase these products direct from them to make sure they're raw authentic. Genuineraw.com. First Smoke of the Day sent you.
And then the first thing he did was hire the world's best well-known cannabis botanist, which was Robert Clark of Marijuana Botany. And the guy that wrote that book, Cannabis, Evolution, Ethnobotany, one of my best friends, went over to the Netherlands in September of 87 and joined him with Hortifarm. And not only did they do Hortifarm, which was the first non-governmental cannabis research company in the world, because the only places doing it at the time was like University of Mississippi, U.S. government, and in Israel, Meshulam, which was
government
Israel,
funded.
Government,
yeah,
of course. So he went and went away. This is also what caused the confusion between my Dutch friends and David, because they realized he has a license to grow cannabis. Why can't we get licensed to grow cannabis? And because it was a pharmaceutical research company, he wasn't going to tell them. What is he going to do? Educate these idiots? You know, and I started writing an article called Ants Under the Skyscraper, the true story of the Dutch seed merchants, because I fucking picture them like ants under a skyscraper that can't even comprehend what's going on in the penthouse floor, because they're over here buying his seeds by the kilo, you know, because he's manufacturing all these seeds, Cali, original. Sorry, but you know what? Happy 420. And
Todd's a real smoker for people that know. Like, I can honestly say, Todd, out of 100 episodes, you have some of the best smoking pot that we've had on. And I have low expectations usually when it's an older, let me just say older guy from our generation, 40s plus, because of all the new strains. No, for real though, because so much advances in technology, but keep it simple, stupid works best. It really does. For sure. It really does. And it's just, it's a funny thing, but it's like, man, absolutely phenomenal. And burning white ash for all the people who, Todd brought some branches. We plucked them right off the branch, the nugs, and absolutely phenomenal. Like, if anybody who's asked me haze expressions, I know for a fact Todd's got the haze. I got it from Skunkman. I don't take credit. I just went to the source. And that's all I did. But it's real. And that's what people, to these days, Todd, like one of the first questions I ask myself when a breeder puts out work, and this is horrible to say, but do I think this person actually has this strain?
Right.
If you say you're breeding this and this, the first question that comes to my head, and I guess you got to kind of be in the industry enough to know if something's made its way out or who has this cut and who's breeding this work. But I can eliminate half the people by just saying, do I think this person actually has this cut? And most of the time it's no when it's something rare. And that's sad it's gotten to that place, but it sounds like that goes way back. Taking other people's work, credit.
If you look at OG Kush going through Phylos, and I know everybody hates Phylos, but it's still DNA testing.
That's who actually gave me this book.
Phylos?
Yeah, one of the guys.
Well,
I commented on a post just saying
there's a lot of nice people that worked at Phylos, and it doesn't mean
Kevin was part of it.
Yeah, and you know, Jordy, you're trying to say, yeah, I know Kevin. We're both from Rhode Island, ironically. But OG Kush went through there over 90 times, and it came in with over 80 names. And there's examples of people both lying, like Khalifa Kush, OG Kush cutting, Hitman OG Kush cutting, and those obviously are lies, compared to mistakes like Dark Heart Nursery, Dark Heart 2, Dark Heart 3, both OG Kush cuttings, but they got the cutting obviously from maybe two different sources. And when they grew it, they couldn't tell it apart. And you might think, well, why couldn't they? Well, easily. One grower could have been organic. Another grower could have been using PGRs. So one plant could have had plant growth hormones in it and had been shorter nodes and bigger buds and looking different from the organic version. And side by side, you couldn't see their DNA. So you wouldn't know you're growing the same cuttings, just one's influenced by hormones.
Yep.
So it'd be really easy for a nursery like Dark Heart not to be able to differentiate between two cuttings of the same thing from two different sources.
Well, even mix light, and then maybe someone's just running HBS or just running one single spectrum, right? That could even change the way.
No, because if you take it and you grow it out and veg it like I do and turn them into mothers and then flower them in your own controlled, not get buds from somebody,
you're seeing multiple.
You're going to see different growth characteristics because I don't think anyone, especially on the level of Dark Heart back in the day, would take someone's word for what it was. They'd have to grow it, test it. I call it authenticate it. And that's what I do, because I had a nursery. When I got out of prison, I was basically, broke and had no money, and it's really hard to get a job when you're on probation. And fortunately, the guys that had OG Kush, Josh D's roommate was a gentleman named Mad Dog, and he basically appreciated my activism. And I had another friend that was common friends with him, and he came over and he said, "Hey, do you want the OG Kush back?" Because they gave it to me before I went to prison. And I had it in the 90s. And then I said, yeah. And he brought it back to me. I got it in November of 04. And then a few months later, I asked my friend, I said, hey, would it be okay if I sell cuttings? Because the first time was no okay. And I promised not to, so I wouldn't. And he said, Todd, he died. He had a medical complication. He died. And I said, whoa. And he said, I don't think it matters anymore. So I was like, holy shit, that's heavy. And then I started selling cuttings of it I started I should have brought your trifold, but
so the guy that you got,
Josh D's roommate,
who
Mad Dog was his nickname.
He originated it with Josh.
No, he was roommates with Josh. The story of Matt bringing it out and giving it to Josh is still the real story.
Okay.
Mad Dog and Josh were roommates. And I mean, I could fast forward to when Josh came out of the closet, so to speak. Adam Dunn, who's an old friend from Amsterdam, had one of the guys that basically cooperated against me, this guy named Dave Richards, on his podcast. And Adam, being a smart ass, basically said to David Richards when he was talking all this bullshit, Adam said, well, why didn't you just tell the DEA that you didn't have anything to do with all those other houses, just this one? And this dumbass says, I did. I told them to go to the Laurel Canyon house, and they went and then they didn't find anything. I told them to go back, and they pulled back the carpet, and he goes, there was a generator in the garage. The real reality was it was my publisher's old house, and he had nothing to do with growing there. He saw me growing there, and he snitched on himself on the live podcast. And I saw Adam at an event, and I gave him a hug, and I said, thank you. And he's like, dude, could you believe he did that? And I was like, I couldn't believe he did it, but thank you. I always knew he cooperated, but for him to just come out and say it on your program was just absolute gold. And he said so much shit. It was the real OG Kush story. And he was trying to claim that he named it Original Genetics at the Paradiso in Amsterdam. It was all bullshit. And so many people saw it, including Josh. And Josh just wanted to puke on it. And I one day get this little message on Instagram from Josh. And Josh was like, hey, I know you got the OG Kush. Can you tell me where you got it from? So I just hit video. I'm like, who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
And he answered. And I was like, hey, what's up? And he's like, nice to meet you.
I pressed him. You pressed him old school. He's trying to press you and you FaceTime video him.
I like
That's
Josh.
awesome.
I've got nothing but good things to say about Josh, but I videoed him and I said, you tell me who I could have got it from. And the first name he said was right. And I was like, oh, you win. I was like, who's Mad Dog? And he goes, dude, Michael. He goes, he held up a picture of him. He goes, dude, he's on my room and he passed away. He was my best friend. And he goes, that makes total sense. He goes, he used to cut out the articles about you in the newspaper and put magnets on the refrigerator. And when I get home, I'd read them. He goes, like, we both admired what you were doing, Todd. We got that you were trying to change the world. And I was like, wow. And I was like, that's incredible. And then Josh came out with the original OG Kush story. And you can see us even on Hash Church back in the day talking about it. I think Josh is a really cool guy. For sure.
It's so interesting though, that is, you know, the story is it was from Florida originally, and it was
for real. Oh.
And then what do you think the genetics are that came into that?
Northern Lights. Yeah, for sure.
Unbelievable how much goes back to Northern Lights.
Well, you want to know what's interesting is when I came home, I was growing Hindu Kush with old Ed at Positronics because we were going through all the old seeds. And Hindu Kush is a more leafy variety, kind of piney, kind of like it stinks a bit. And when I saw the what we were calling at the time when I got home, when I got back to California, it was the end of December. I was hanging out in LA the beginning January of 97, and I got what was called the Kush. It wasn't called OG Kush yet. And I was like, this is a misnomer. This is not Hindu Kush. This is Northern Lights, because it smelled like the stuff I smoked at the Castle with Alan Dronkers. Because I've slept at the Cannabis Castle. Like, Alan's a good friend.
Can you tell us about the Cannabis Castle? I know we're going on.
It's a cool mansion in the Netherlands. Neville purchased it in the end of '84 and renovated it, moved into it. It was a large mansion on a farmland that was like built by an old brewery owner, and it had like a basement that was like an old brewery or something like that. And Neville converted it into grow rooms, and it was kind of crass compared to what we do now, but it got a lot of attention because Steve Hager wrote an article about Neville that came out in March of 1987 in High Times. It was like 20 pages long, and it showed the Cannabis Castle, and he called it the Cannabis Castle, and he called Neville the would-be king of cannabis, and he gave him all this credit for all of these varieties that he had. That came from Skunkman Sam. All of it. I mean, all of it. Early Girl, Early Pearl, Afghani One, Durban, Hindu Kush. He didn't have Haze at the time. And this threw me because when David said that to me, that I didn't sell any seeds to him in 1985, it made sense to me because nobody wanted Haze, or would have if they'd known about it, because it's a long growing, long flowering. They wanted shit that worked. They wanted stuff that they could put under lights and get some weed.
The same thing you hear investors talking about today. Exactly. They want production. They want to be able to harvest it 60 days, reset the room, and call it 2 months. They don't want to, all the stuff that is honestly killing craft cannabis and what we fell in love with.
So the generation I came from, we were about quality.
Yeah.
And quality and quantity do not go hand in hand. And the problem we see now, and the reason you can't get things like this at a dispensary, is the same reason you can't get caviar at a McDonald's. And it's because the people that shop at McDonald's don't know what caviar tastes like or smells like, and they wouldn't know to order it. And unfortunately, our cannabis community has not experienced what real Haze is and doesn't know to order it, doesn't know they want it. It was 94 when I got to Amsterdam and got a Haze combination from the guys at the Castle. It was probably NL5 by Haze, and it was like morning coffee. It woke me up. I mean, even now I got to put the joint down because it feels like speed.
It does.
It's a different vibe.
Yes.
And I had no idea because I'd been growing things that smelled like skunk and were like kind of broadleaf drug varieties. I got some seeds from my mom's friends who brought the weed down from Vermont in 1984 because I started selling weed in 82. And my mom had been a what I called a pollard dealer. So through the 70s, I was like a welfare trap because I had a pre-existing medical condition. So nobody would give my mom, like, she couldn't get jobs because I was always going to the hospital. And then my little brother was born with a Down syndrome condition and an open heart condition. And we were both medical nightmares. And she sold weed out of the house for extra money. So I grew up around her friends coming over. And then her friends, when she wasn't home, would call up and go, "Hey, Todd, your mom home?" I say, "No." They say, "Can I come home or can I come over anyway?" I say, "Yeah." So they come over and they just give me a 20. And my mom up in her drawer had 10 bags, 20 bags, 40 bags. And I'd put the 20 in and take a 20 out and give them the bag. And for a while, when I was living with my grandma, they would distract grandma and slip me the money. go over there, put it in, and then grandma would turn around and give them their bag of weed. And they'd like, okay, tell Ann I came by, and they'd split, and grandma was none the wiser. And I learned how to sell weed from this experience. And then when I was 12, my stepfather was a big 6'5" biker, and he was like Harley guy, went to Nam, did 4 years in Nam. So I had motorcycles. I had one when I was 8, had another one when I was 12. So the deal with to getting the one when I was 12 was like, look, kid, if you make it to 12, I'll get you another bike. So he did. And he got me a Suzuki TS100, and I was 12 and light, and I was started riding trails, and my mom was giving me bags of weed. So all the kids that I was riding with were like 16, 17, 18, because I was the only like 12-year-old delinquent in the crew. And one day we stopped, and my friends, John Robertson, I'll never forget, and Mark and a few others, he pulled out a bag of weed that was brown. And I looked at it, I said, why is it brown? He goes, what do you know about marijuana? I said, well, I know it shouldn't be brown. He goes, it comes brown. I said, well, it don't grow brown. He goes, what the fuck do you know? And I had gotten a $20 bag from my mom that day, and I had rolled 2 joints and split it in half and took the smaller half with me, and just because you never know, and some rolling papers. And I had 2 joints rolled. So I went over to my motorcycle and I got a rolled joint and I lit it and I passed it to him and I showed him a little bag of green weed. And he looked at it and he was like, where'd you get that? I was like, ask me no questions. I'll tell you no lies. And he was like, funny. I was like, that's what my dad says. And he was like, would you sell it to me? I was like, oh yeah. How much will you give me for it? Because I figured they pay more than my mom's friends for sure. And he was like, if I give you $20, will you feel like I ripped you off? I said, no, that's cool. Because it was 20 to start off with, and half of it's still at home. So I was like, and then as the joint went around, all my friends started coughing. And one of my taller friends, Mark, he hit the joint and started coughing. He says, wow, that's what it's supposed to feel like. And passed it on. And John gave me $20. Mind you, I'm 12 and it's 1982. $20 was my gas tank didn't even hold a gallon. It was like 82 cents a gallon for regular gas at the time. I was like, $20 was a lot of fucking money. And then my other friend was like, can I get one too? And I was like, yes. So I went home. He lived a few houses away. I grabbed that second bag, went over there, sold it to him. I had $40. I was 12. Yeah. I brought my friends to Friendly's. It was like a little hamburger joint. I bought like hamburger, French fries, and Cokes. I only spent $5. It was 1982. And I went to my mom that night and I said, hey, can I get another bag? And she says to me, oh, Todd, you gotta make it last. I can't just be giving you a bag every day. And then I was like, can I just buy it? And she was like, fuck. Like I saw the look on her face was just like, fuck.
Here we go.
And I could have just went there and put a 20 in and taken 20 out, and she wouldn't have asked who came over anyway, because it was like that common. She wouldn't have been like, who'd you sell the bag to? So I could have just done it, but I was too honest. And she looked at me, she goes, yeah, I guess so. I said, can I pick it? And she's like, yeah. So I went over there, I grabbed all the bags, I went through it, I got the big one, all the nice buds, and I was like, this is cool. And I was like, roll me a joint. And she rolled me a fucking pinner. And I was like, no, I want a good joint. And she was like, don't waste it. And I was like, So I grabbed an album, I went there and I practiced rolling until I was rolling perfect joints. And my little rebellion was going into my mom's room, being like, want to smoke a joint and be a fatty? And she'd be like, that's wasteful. I'd be like, okay, I'll go smoke it on my own. And she'd be like,
that's funny. The older generation always says that. That's like, you'll see the joints today and people are like, my dad, we went to Jamaica and I roll up with the same thing. And he's like, that's an insane joint. And I'm like, yeah, well, here's yours too. He's like, these are for your own personal. I'm like, yeah, everyone smokes their own joint. He couldn't get over that. He had probably mentioned it 100 times after the next week of like, you're out there smoking the whole joint. I'm like, yeah. That's what it's for.
Dude, I feel bad for people that have to buy 8. I mean, my joints were usually 1.9, 2 grams a piece. And I don't even get 2 good joints out of an 1/8.
You roll a nice joint, by the way.
Well, thank you, sir.
This is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. You put in some serious hours.
Yoa of the Greenhouse one day hit me up when I was in Amsterdam and he said, are you alone? I said, yeah. He said, well, meet me at the Dillon, which is one of the nicest hotels in Amsterdam. I said, sure. And I get there and I go on this little boat and it's Jason Mraz of Jason Mraz, and Raining Jane. And Jason goes, how do you get a job as a professional joint roller? And I looked at him and I go, what? And Yoa says, will you deny it? And he starts handing me all these Tupperwares. He goes, I brought all your favorites. And I was like, oh, you did? And I was like, thanks. And Jason was like, so you're not a professional joint roller? I was like, and Yo was like, oh, he is. And I was like, Jesus. And I was like, well, what kind of joints do you want? You want filtered? You want tapered? You want Americans with no filters? Like, and he's like, so you are? And I was like, no, I'm not, but I can roll good joints for you. And he's like, well, what do you do? And I was like, I'm an activist. And he's like, what does an activist do? And I was like, that's a really good question because I'm not too sure myself, but I've stood in front of supermarkets. I've made books. I've traveled around to concerts. I've tabled in front of colleges. I've spoke. I opened Woodstock.
Put people together.
Yeah. And then now I make movies because books and all that shit was too slow. So now you can put grandma in front of one of my documentaries for 120 minutes and she'll come away saying, you should legalize hemp.
Yeah.
And that's what
my parents saw the union. I mean, so many people have. I mean, Todd, I want to ask about a headline that hit, and it was Beverly Hills Mansion busted.
Yeah, I was in Bel Air, not Beverly Hills.
Bel Air
Mansion you busted. Tell me I was in Beverly Hills.
My bad.
Just
my
kidding,
bad.
I'm kidding. No, I'm joking.
It's even the ritzier part of that area.
It is.
Yeah.
What's the difference between Bel Air and Beverly Hills? The producers that hire the people that live in Beverly Hills, they live in Bel Air. Right?
Yeah, it's like some super California shit. Everyone's like Beverly Hills is the top. It's like, no, there's this other part called Bel Air that's like, looks down on everybody else. Yeah.
I was on Stone Canyon, no less.
Wow.
So what happened is I came back from Amsterdam, and this publisher named Peter McWilliams, who was a 5-time New York Times bestselling author on 5 different subjects, he's phenomenal. One of his books is called Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, The Absurdity of Consensual Crimes in Our Free Society. Phenomenal. It's 800 pages, and he borrowed heavily from Jack's book. And I had read his book because of Jack, because Jack, I worked on the Empress, so Jack would always give me books like Fats to Heal, Fats to Kill, and Ain't Nobody's Business, and say, read it. Let me know if they plagiarized us. And I was like, okay. So
Jack Herrera for everyone listening.
Yeah, because we worked together constantly. And so I'd read the whole book, and I was blown away. And Peter had written these other books called Hey, Do It, Let's Get Off Our Butts, and the whole Life 101 series. Phenomenally deep dude. He got cancer and AIDS in 1996, March of 96, while I was in Amsterdam. And he had a friend named William Buckley Jr., the guy that is famous for conservative.
Yeah.
Yale graduate. And then the guy from Normal was Richard Cowan, also graduated Yale class of 62. He was an old man, and we were friends in Amsterdam. And I met him through Normal back in 1994. And we both happened to live in Amsterdam at the same time, and we were friends, and he worked at Positronics as well. And Peter sent one of his liaisons over to find someone because he wanted to do a book on medical marijuana because now he was using it. And the guy met me. He had picked up my magazine because it was published, it was in print, and it was available everywhere at the time, like at the fucking train stations and shit. So when I met him, he's looking at me, he's like, you look familiar to me. And I went to give him my magazine. He goes, that's it. I saw your picture in it because it's in the editorial. And we started talking, and he was McMullen, and Peter was McWilliams, and I was McCormick, and he made a joke that it's McGreat. And he was like, you're the reason I'm here, I think. He goes, Peter wanted an expert. He goes, I've never met anyone that knows more than you about the subject. And I was like, come on. I was like, a lot of people know more than me. He's like, well, you have a way of describing it very well. Peter will really love you. And I was like, okay. So he left. I took a meeting with Peter on the phone, and he was no hippie. He was like, when are you coming to LA? I was like, well, I'm coming to California. I might visit, blah, blah, blah. He goes, no, I want a meeting like January 3rd at 2:00 at my office in Santa Monica Boulevard. How much would that cost? And I was like, he goes, how about I send you $5,000? Will you show up for $5,000? You could keep it. I was like, you're paying me $5,000 to have a meeting with you? He goes, yes.
Which now it's probably like $25,000.
Well, it was, I was in Amsterdam. I was like, I was getting by, but I wasn't made of money, and I would help, $5,000
What year
in
is
LA,
this?
96.
96. Okay.
Was the conversation. Then 97, I went there for the January 3rd meeting. I showed up. I was early. And I know this sounds batshit crazy, but I had the LA dream. I mean, I went into a meeting. He loved it. He initially offered me $10,000 and 8% of my book. And I said, no. And he was like, why no? I was like, because it's LA. I don't even know what you do at $10,000 in LA. And he was like, he goes, you know what? Come back in 6 weeks. Do you have a car? I said, no, I just got here. He goes, borrow my Lexus. and it was bitching. He had like an LS400 with like a fucking super system in it. And so I went and saw all my friends for like January into February. And I had been getting weed from people, and, you know, because I have a lot of friends. And I came back with a hockey bag full of weed, like a big ass hockey bag that you see up north. And when we got back there, PETA had just bought an ounce of weed from for $600 from the West Hollywood dispensary, which I found to be repulsive. And when I got into his place, he had me send back a couple boxes from Amsterdam. One had, you know, medicine, hash and grass in it, and the other one had my seed collection. And because I sent one to him and one to me, and they were both sitting there. And because as soon as I walked in, I saw them. I was like, ooh, mail came. He's like, yes, they did, but I didn't open it till you came. And I was like, this one's yours. And we open it, and there are stuffed animals. And he's like, you got me a stuffed animal? I was like, I turned it over. I was like, pinata? And I pull it open. He was like, and he starts pulling out all these little bags of hash and grass that I was getting at the coffee shops for him. And I start pulling out little bags of seeds that have 1,000 seeds in each, because I count them all out. And I had maybe over 50 of them. I had a little pile of them.
All different varieties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because me and Ed were making seeds at Positronics. And I mean, I had 1,000 seeds out of what we were pulling down was nothing. So I had a lot of seeds. And Peter says to me, what do you got? I said, I got seeds. And I handed him back. And it said 1,000 CT. And he goes, how much does the seed cost? I said, $5, $10. And he goes, so this little baggie's 10 grand? I said, yeah. And I got a pile of them in front of me. And he was like, no wonder you said no to my money. And I was like, well, you didn't offer me very much money. And he was like, I see that. And he had this little bag of weed. And my girlfriend at the time, Hillary Black, who went on to open the Cannabis Club in Vancouver, she'd been a significant figure, but at the time we were together. And I was like, Dare, will you get our cannabis? And she was like, oh, I'd love to. And she went out there and she came in with a duffel bag. And Peter was from Michigan and he hadn't seen a hockey bag in a long time. And he was just like, is that a hockey bag? And I was like, yeah, they hold more. And she brought it over and I unzipped it and I start pulling out like, oh, this is a Northern Lights. And hey, this is a kind of hazy. This is like California orange. Oh, this is an Afghan. This is like a Hindu Kush. And and he's sitting on this big leather chair and suddenly he's like, got all this weed on him. And his little ounce was gone. And I'm sitting in front of all these seeds. And he goes, if I gave you $250,000, would you stay in LA and work with me? And I said, and I looked at her and she was like, yeah, I could work with that. And he was like, he stood up, all the weed fell on the floor. He's wearing a fucking robe, a little bird's running around on his shoulders, shitting on him. He's wearing shower shoes. Looks like he had bedhead for days. No fucks to give. He shook my hand. He said, you still got the keys to my car, honey? She said, yeah. He said, let's bring him to the bank before he changes his mind. And we literally walked out of his room in the living room. We got in the Lexus. I drove down to the Wells Fargo on Fairfax. And you got a lot of money when you walk into the bank wearing a robe with shit on it from a bird. And the manager runs over and says, Mr. McWilliams, please come into my office. And smoops him in. So we have your organic milk. Would you like a glass? He said, sure. Want some milk? I was like, no. And he comes in, he goes, I need you to put $250,000 in his account. Probably need a new account. You don't have a Wells Fargo account. I said, no. Because he needs a company card. And what's the limit on the ATM card? And the guy said some small amount. And I was like, no. I can't have that. That won't work. And he was like, well, that's all we're going to give you. I was like, well, then just cut me a check and I'll leave and go to another bank. And he says, let me see what I can do. And then he walks out. Peter goes, that's the best right there. He goes, you just take the money and walk out. And I was like, what else was the answer? And he came back, he raised it. It was like 10 grand a day I could take out. And I was just like, that was easy. And I left and I drove Peter back up and we smoked some weed. And it was the beginning of my LA life. And at the time we got faxes to look at like rental properties. Mm-hmm. And I swear to shit, I was driving down Sunset. We went by the East Gate and I was coming to a stop at a red light and my friend was flipping through pieces of paper and he goes, whoa, 5-storied castle styled mansion on hill, complete with an elevator, fully gated. And Todd, it's on Stone Canyon. And as we stopped at the light, we were at Stone Canyon. The UCLA is to the left. You can't go left. You can only go right. And he's like, it's a sign. And I was like, this is fucked up. So we took a right. We drove 2 miles up Stone Canyon, came around the corner, and there was like this mock castle. And we just sat there laughing because it kind of looked stupid. And, but, you know, who the fuck builds castles? But somebody did. And we thought it was funny. So I next day went to go look because it was huge. and they liked me, and they rented it to me. And I had started my seeds at Peter's house, is what Dave saw, and there was a generator there, but it was there just to back up the house. And the reason it was removed is because we had a little earthquake, and the exhaust shifted, and it caused because it would kick on once a month to like generate the batteries. And it caused a fire in the garage, and Peter had already bought a second house up the street. So we owned 2. So he just said, fuck that generator, and had it removed. And then he got raided, because then I got raided in July 29th, 97. And then he got raided in December of 97.
For both cultivating?
Yeah, that was all there was. I mean, I got
all those seeds.
No, the seeds were when I had all the money and all that space, there's a reason why there's me standing in front of trays and trays and trays and trays of cuttings.
Beautiful too. I mean, great setup even then.
Yeah, happy watering causes the praying, by the way. And but it was insane. I mean, it was a dream come true in a way. And I went to Peter, when Peter came over and I saw what I rented, he was like, "Why the fuck don't I live in a Bel Air mansion?" I was like, but I kind of like it. I'm glad I have one.
Yeah.
And it was a joke. And he had me come over and he said, "Todd, I have a serious question. What would you do if money wasn't the issue? If you could do anything you wanted, any budget, please tell me, what would you do?" I said, "Well, I want a GCMS machine so I can do all the cannabinoid testing and see what the cannabinoids are. I want to be able to test my plants each day through flower, because it's only like 70, 80, 100 days, and be able to find I want to see the carbolic acid build up, drop off. I want to get to know the plants on a chemical level. It's like a little chemist inside of his lab, and you're peering through his window, and he's making all these compounds a little bit different each day. And I want to see what he's doing." And he was like, "How much are one of those?" I was like $250,000 plus I need a technician to run it, because I don't know how to run it. So I need my own lab. And he was like, "Okay, what else?" And I was just like, and I got to tell you, it was an exercise into dreaming. And it was a beautiful thing to dream in, because I'd come back from Amsterdam, best friends with Rob Clark, hearing everything about what they were doing at Hortifarm, which was all cannabinoid and terpene research. And I was fucking floored. First CBD I smoked was from Rob. And because I have the neck pain, he was like, "Will you try this? It's no THC, it's all CBD. You're not going to get high, but we were wondering if it helps your neck." So I started smoking it, and it didn't get me high. It did alleviate the pain a little bit, but I like to get high. So I went back to THC real fast. But they were doing this because when Skunkman Sam, David Watson, hired Rob, what he did was send him to every cannabis producing country they knew to collect both industrial and drug genetics, bring them back, grow them out, and test them. And then what they would do is they would destroy all the cannabis per the Dutch guidelines, but they would do all the in-house GCMS testing and then terpene testing. It is phenomenal what they did. And then they were doing classifications of all the genetics from all over the world. Do you know what the Vavilov Research Institute is? Okay, well, back in St. Petersburg, Russia, it was the last seed germplasm lab to contain cannabis. And these guys were funding it because they had American investors that were investing in a hortifarm, and they were literally having money, cash American dollars, driven up to St. Petersburg to keep that place going. So when it went under, they got a majority of those genetics. Phenomenal. So Finola, the industrial hemp variety, is the most popular variety in the world. Technically, those seeds came from the Vavilov Research Institute, were selected by David Watson through the International Hemp Association, and they are the plants that were used to create Finola. And if you look into the history of Finola, it literally says that he didn't select the plants, they were given to him through the International Hemp Association. Well, that was only Dave and Rob. So it's not hard to know where that came from. And because I knew all the backstory about what they were doing with the Vavilov Research, fucking phenomenal what these guys were doing. The only people like it, and this is why my Dutch friends were clueless. They were clueless as to what David Watson and Rob Clark were doing. Because when you think of Cannabis Botany written in 1981, it hasn't been changed for 43 years. He got it that right. Usually books get revised, not Rob's. It's 4 decades now, hasn't changed it. I mean, these guys were so ahead of the game, it's incredible. And they saw a huge opportunity to hit the market with genetic THC. So they were going around and finding all these plants and collecting them, but they weren't just into the drug varieties, they were into hemp. And when they started the International Hemp Association, they did a 100% hemp journal that was peer reviewed, printed on hemp, and then started hemp educational kits that had crayons and hemp seed oil and soaps and pieces of fabric and rope. And they would send this around to colleges because they were trying to re-educate the educators, the teachers, the idiots that were in the fucking highest educational universities, didn't know shit about cannabis, believed the propaganda and the bullshit. But when you put the educational kits in front of them and the peer-reviewed articles, it was really hard to deny the science. And if you're an educated person, you're usually not a science denier. It's just you haven't seen it yet. So these guys were instrumental in bringing this knowledge to everyone around the world. And I used to buy the educational kits and show them to people when we would table, because we would go and put it on the table and have little pieces of crayons and stuff you could touch and see that it was hemp. And people would be like, they wouldn't believe me that this was a hemp sweatshirt, and it was a huge educational process to get to where, I remember in 1997, I was standing in front of my castle with a hemp flag that was made out of hemp. And they ran the story because I was on the news. You get busted with 4,000 plants in a Bel Air mansion, you're going to be on the news a lot.
It was the headline.
Oh, it was 4 times a day, dude. Yeah. And it turned me off to trying to, before it happened, I was nobody. I drove a fucking blue Plymouth minivan because I didn't want people to judge me on what I had. And because I didn't want them to know I had a fucking Bel Air mansion. So I was like, drive a piece of shit, like wear no jewelry, no makeup, no, I'm not nothing, nothing. And then I was on the news 4 times a day. Woody Harrelson bailed me out for $500,000. Larry Flint's attorney showed up to defend me. Alan Isaacman's a great guy.
And did you know them prior?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you knew them prior, and then you had friends that stood up and came out for you.
It's a fucked up thing to say, but and I never would say to somebody you go through it and it can be a positive experience. But I feel that my childhood cancer experience was a positive experience that I had a hard time appreciating at the time because I was suffering. I was going through chemo. I was depressed. I was going through radiation. I was going through surgeries. I was in the hospital a lot. All of it fucking sucked. Mm-hmm. But now, if you had a little magic wand and you could wave it over my head and say, Todd, you'll never have had cancer, I would break it because I'd be afraid I'd wake up in a fucking 7-Eleven selling cigarettes or some shit in Rhode Island with no passion and no direction and nothing. So I'm grateful for the lessons I learned as a kid going through cancer. And then when I got busted, I did know Woody. I knew his family. I knew Larry. We were working on doing a magazine because when I had that Hemp Life magazine and I met Woody, we met through common friends, and he was at my house one day and he asked me to buy some weed. I said, no, I'll give you some weed, but I'm not selling you some weed. And he was like, serious? And I was like, yeah. I was like, dude, I have a lot of it because I had a lot of it. And I was like, you can have some. He's like, but I want to be able to come back. And I was like, you can come back. I was like, look, if you'll tell me what you like, I'll give you weed. If you help me test this stuff and go through it and give me your opinions, I'll just give you weed forever. And he's like, you're fucking serious? And I was like, I don't want to sell weed. I was like, I got all the money I need. This is not what I'm doing. We were going to do a book, we were going to do a video, and we were going to do me going on the road and teaching grow medicine is what I was going to call it, was grow medicine. Mm. And he vibed that. And, we were friends for months and months. And then what happened is he joked, because I handed him my magazine, and it's really a nice magazine. He was like, you're like a little Larry. And I was like, Larry? He's like, Larry Flint. And he's like, so he calls Larry and he says, hey, I want you to meet somebody. Will you come over? And Larry says, no. And I said to him, is he still in a wheelchair? He said, yeah. It's a phone. Yeah. And before I said, hey, Larry, I said, I want you to know my house is totally handicap accessible. I have a full size elevator that brings you up to the floors, and it's easy access for you. And he said, oh. I said, here's Woody. And I handed the phone back. And he's like, okay, I'll come right over. And I was like, Woody was like, I was in a wheelchair for 8 months, dude. You don't go where you don't go. Like, you don't go where you don't know.
Instead of explaining a whole thing to you, it's easier just to say no.
Yes. Yeah.
Because God, they try to make it happen if it isn't accessible. Okay.
And he did. He showed up with this big ass bodyguard and his Bentley, and we went upstairs and fucking hung out. And he read my editorial, and Woody asked him how much it would cost to get a magazine like that off the ground. And he threw out a number, and Woody said, I'll match you. And Larry said, who's gonna run it? He said to him.
What Larry Flynn think about cannabis?
Larry's pro cannabis. Dude, I love Larry. I was at his bachelor party, his wedding. I got nothing but love for him and Liz. They were great people in my life. And when I used to go visit my lawyer on the 4th floor of the Flint building, I'd go right upstairs and go hang out with Larry after I was done. He'd give me pep talks. He went to Terminal Island as well because he wouldn't turn in his source of information for the DeLorean tape. Dude, when I got out of prison on Woody's $500,000, the very first I went to sleep, I got out at midnight, woke up, I went and had breakfast with Larry, and Liz made us breakfast. That was before I got married. And he told me, he said, Todd, you're not going to be able to do the magazine while you're being prosecuted. I tried to do a magazine while I was being prosecuted and it didn't work. He goes, just bite the bullet. He said, be a hero, come home, and we'll deal with it. And I was just like, all right. And it's a hard pill to swallow to go, because I went up and met with Larry, and he said, Todd, you only get to blow $1 million once. Go home, make a budget, down to the penny, come back. And I was like, I literally went home from his house, like, I got to make $1 million budget to launch a magazine. What the fuck am I going to, like, do you know how hard that is? When you get home and the piece of paper is ever so white and you're like, where do I even start? How are these numbers real? Like, it feels like, fuck, he gave me an insurmountable task. And then I got busted. And then, but they were great friends. And, you know, you don't want to get busted and find out you don't have friends, but to get busted and find out you're surrounded by love is a beautiful feeling. And, you know, even when I went to prison, I self-surrendered January 3rd, 2000. I spent New Year's 1999 at Hef's house, and then with Woody and Bill. And then Monday morning, got up, put on a hemp suit, got stoned, got laid, got some veggie burgers because I'm vegetarian, and drove to prison and showed up on time. Was
turn yourself in
and never had a Jesus moment in the garden where I was like, baby Jesus, do I really have to get killed? No, it was like, they made it really clear that if you cooperate, that you know, time served, or they won't ask for much time.
And when you say cooperate, you don't mean telling anyone. You just mean show up, go to jail.
No. The federal prosecutors made it really clear. They want you to come down and debrief, which is cooperate. They want you to cooperate. And dude, here I am surrounded by Jack Harrer and other people, and there was no fucking way I was going to go down there and start answering questions. So it was like, this is not even on the table. Like, what's the opportunity? The other option is go to prison. What time? That'll be a lot easier for me to live with than fucking dealing with your bullshit. And I was in there for 18
Losing
months.
who you are. Yeah.
Well, it is. You know, my grandma was Italian, and loyalty was huge in my family. You know, I remember being a little kid and I got out of pocket once, and my grandma pulled me aside. I was in a restaurant and she said, listen, if you have a problem with me, you talk about it when we get home. Don't ever embarrass me in public. We're a team. And I was like, okay. I almost get shivers thinking of it. And grandma, like, that shit hit me. Like, it hit me. And we went home and we talked about it, and we were on a team forever. And then my mom was kind of the same thing with her bong and her rolling papers, but you had to be. This is the only way to be. And, you know, when I got out of prison, Bill Maher threw a fucking getting out of prison party for me at his house. Like, my friends were all there still. Like, nothing changed. I went right back to, you know, I'm working on a book now. It's called The Lifetime of Freedom Was Worth 5 Years in Prison. Because I fucking mean it. It was. Yeah. I was in for 18 months, and they sent Alan Isaacman, and he said, I know your answer. He goes, but I'm obligated to give you the options they give you. I said, what's the option? He said, you go down and debrief, and they'll say time served. And I was like, fuck that. And he goes, Todd, you'll be here for another 3.5 years. I said, I'm well aware. And he was like, and I sat there for 3.5 more years because there was no fucking way I was going to do it.
Did you have visitors? Did you have people come visit you, friends?
Yeah, my girlfriend, Bill Maher, used to visit me in prison.
That's a pretty funny person to visit at the time. I mean, he's...
Bill? Yeah. He was still doing Politically Incorrect at the time. He was also doing Real Time, but then they shipped me away.
Did you know Joe Rogan before this as well?
No, I met Joe in 2004 when I got out of prison.
How did that happen?
Me and Joe were at a party. I was with Jack Harrer and a bunch of people, and there's a guy named Paul that had a dispensary south of the 10. And I forget his full name, but he was a really nice guy. I think he's passed away, sadly. But Joe's just a real down-to-earth person. And I have a picture of me and Joe when the first night we met. And Joe's from Massachusetts, and we're also a couple salty New Englanders. And him and I started talking, and we ended up walking out to my van, and no shit, we stood on the side of this van until the sun came up talking. And when the sun started getting bright, Joe's like, yo, we should just be friends. And I was like, yeah. So we traded numbers, and we just became friends at that point. And I got a lot of love for Joe Rogan. He's one of the nicest human beings I ever met in my life. He's extremely intelligent. He's in one of the best balances of both physical and mental development I've really ever met. I mean, Joe's been great. I mean, when I got the Playboy parties, the people at MPP said, who are you going to have MC? I said, well, I want to have Joe Rogan. And he said, oh, Todd, we asked him last year and he said no. I said, well, no disrespect to you asking him. I said, well, we kind of different. And he was like, well, you can ask him. We'd love to have him. So I hung up, called. He was in some parking lot on the East Coast and he answered. And I was like, hey, man, I'm going to be producing parties at the Playboy Mansion. Would you MC it? He said, fuck yeah. And then he says, they asked me to do it last year, but the guy was kind of sketchy. And I was like, okay.
So you're like, hold on, you're on speaker.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. He wasn't.
Yeah, but that's funny though.
But I understood why Joe got the weird vibe, but nice guy either way. And he said yes. And then DJ Pooh, the producer, he's one of my good friends too.
What's that, NWA?
First time you heard him was when Easy E says, Jay, where's the drum machine? He says, I left the motherfucker with Pooh. And that's DJ Pooh. So I was on Melrose one day in 04 and this big black guy standing next to me and he looks down and he says, are you Todd McCormick? And I said, yeah. And he was like, can I give you a hug? You're one of my heroes. And I was like, me? And he's like, yeah. And I gave him a hug. And I was like, you want to get high? And he's like, hell yeah. So we went back to my place and me and Pooh have been best friends to this day. I mean, I absolutely love the guy. When I got busted in 06, it was DJ Pooh and the guy that made the Boondocks, Aaron McGruder, that came and got me from the jail in the Valley. And,
trippy.
I've been surrounded by love, dude. I have been very fortunate.
Well, in history, you're in a lot of the right places with the right people and having just amazing conversations or amazing things that come out of it. Like, could you speak a little bit about Seattle Greg's impact?
Huge. Seattle Greg was a young man in 1966 who volunteered to become a Marine and go to Vietnam. He was in Vietnam from 66 to 69. Came away from it kind of hating the government. And he moved back to Seattle and started studying plants. And a phenomenal guy. No, I'm cool. I'm gonna like this. And
because this guy, the impact he had on genetics is just legendary.
So it's incredible. So it goes back a little bit because it's not just Greg. So in the 70s, there were a handful of really good cannabis books. One of them was by a gentleman named Murphy Stevens, and it was titled How to Grow Marijuana Indoors Under Lights. And it's phenomenal. It was, I love Mel Frank, and there's others. Mountain Girl wrote her book, but this book was amazing in the way that it had 10 by 20 trays. It had CO2 enrichment. It had cloning techniques. It was modern. It was what we do now. And he not only put out the book, but he owned what was called the Indoor Sun Shop, which was a hydroponic store open to this day in Seattle. And it's a family-run business he's had since the 60s. And
that's probably how he knew he was hands-on. He was in the mix.
Oh, he was the real deal.
Yeah.
So in 1979, Seattle Greg, being someone a customer of his store, became friends with him. And he was nice enough to give him 4 purest indica seeds, that he called it, in 1979. Greg took these home. He got 2 boys, 2 girls, bred them together, made like an F2 for the lack of better expression, but we don't know how many times they were already bred together. We don't know when he got them from Afghanistan. We don't know how long they were in that region. So I'm not making up some bullshit F numbers. I'm just not I'm not that person. But he gave them to him and he bred them together. I call it an IBL, or an inbred line. And he then passed those seeds around to his friends. His friends then started breeding it with whatever they had, and then giving him back seeds. And then what he did is the Northern Lights numbers 1 through 11 is basically a grading system. It's the 1 is the closest to the purest indica, and the 11 is the most narrow leaf drug variety furthest away from it, and the 5 is just right in the middle, kind of. And he got the 5 from one of the guys that worked at the indoor sub shop named Herbie. He didn't make it. It was Herbie that made it. Herbie told him that it was a cross of the purest indica with a Hawaiian, but there is no indigenous Hawaiian weed. So Greg always thought it was maybe a Northern Mexican, think Acapulco Gold or something. And then when he called Northern Lights number 2, so there's a little confusion, is to Greg, Northern Lights number 1 initially was his reproduction of those seeds and passing them around. And then the first thing he made, the first hybrid he made, was to cross the purest indica with an Afghan that he had. Because Greg said he got some Afghan from California and some Afghan from Oregon, bred it together, and that was like his plant, if you will. And when he got the purest indica, he bred that to it. That's what he calls Northern Lights number 2. It was sent as Northern Lights number 1 because Greg only sent the hybrids, not the purest indica, to Neville, because he didn't want Neville to be able to make the hybrids without him, because initially the deal was Neville was going to sell the hybrid seeds for Greg, but then just knocked him off, and their relationship was under a year. And it was the same. So Seattle Greg didn't know Skunkman Sam until I fortunately was able to put them together in 2018 over the internet.
But Seattle Greg was making the seeds in the US, or the seeds were getting made in the US with him and his friends, but then he was sending them to Amsterdam to then get distributed because that seemed Neville like a safer method.
Well, you got to realize before Neville met Skunkman Sam and then Greg a couple months later, he was only selling seeds for $1, 25 cents each. And he was literally had a disclaimer saying, I can't vouch for the seeds. I didn't make them. I collect them at coffee shops. So the whole breeding fantasy that he was this incredible breeder, it's just not real. And the fact is according to Neville in his own interviews, he first picked up a Mel Frank grow book in 1981. Not to knock on it,
but it goes from $1 a seed to we can get, $15 a seed if it's based out of somewhere that has, I guess, a more prestigious origin.
Well, think about this. I mean, what's a dog from the pound worth compared to a pedigree bulldog?
Yeah.
It's huge.
Put it in a fancy Mylar and mark it up.
And what you were saying earlier about questioning where they got the genetics.
Yes.
It's exactly that, because how do you come away from a dog pound and say, look, I've got a perfect bulldog? It's bullshit. And they don't know what they have. And this is why specifically I called authentic genetics. And it was because there were so many people slinging bullshit stories. And initially, I believed all the bullshit that Ben and Neville told me, because they were taking credit for Skunk and Haze and Neville's Haze. He had nothing to fucking do with Haze. Arian's Haze, nothing to do with Haze. They're all hybrids of Haze with Haze, because all Neville had were males. So when I went back...
So who originated all that work then? Sam the Skunkman?
Well, Skunkman Sam preserved the Haze genetics. He got them from G, his neighbor. But Skunkman Sam, Mel Frank, Greg, the one thing I would say that they have really impressed upon me is not just breeding, it's preservation. Because the one thing most of this community gets lost is they lose their genetics, because they're doing what the Haze guys did on the hill, which was outcrossing it until it's all but gone. And what made David different is he not only collected genetics, he saw them for the value that they were, and then he would IBL them. And when I called them up,
which stabilizes them? No,
it depends. Yes and no, because you got to depend on the genetics. It doesn't always stabilize them. This is why we don't fuck our cousins. Babies don't come out so good. What you get is segregation in the genetics. So in reality, your best, most robust generation is always an F1 when you use dissimilar parents. If you're not using completely dissimilar genetics, you're not going to get a true F1. You're going to get something that is somewhat related or a back cross in some instances, because this is where DNA testing becomes so fantastic to me, because now you can actually test this to this and be like, they're not related. Breed them together, see how they do. When you start taking them and breeding them into each other, you start seeing the grandfathers and the grandparents and the other. But that can be a good thing too, because back in the 70s, we didn't grow from clone. So the acid dream that Skunkman Sam had to make a relatively true breeding variety is because everybody grew from seed. So you wanted the uniformity and the consistency in the seeds. Now people buy packs of 10 from me, go home, pick one and throw 9 away, because now they're going for that one best example of the mother. I've been doing it for 30 years plus, because once I got to Holland and realized the uniqueness of the plants and stopped thinking in bulk, but started thinking in like Albert Einstein, like that one's smart. Let's keep that one. That's OG Kush, Sour D, Trainwreck. These are the elite clones that we have that stood out. They were the best example from that batch, is how I would do it. So when I get a pack of seeds, I literally, it could be 1,000, it could be 100, it could be 10. I want to throw away 999 or 999 of them, because I want the best example of that batch. So I can then use it to go breed with, or just propagate it like I have OG Kush over the years and just continue to make killer weed. Because that's how, like, I've had OG Kush growing in my garden for 20 years now. next month November will be 20 years that I've had it. And through cuttings of cutting,
yes.
mothers of mothers of mothers, I've never lost the genetic.
Thank
I never
God.
will.
Well, because you emphasize preservation, and that's something that I brought up, probably 100 podcasts ago, where I felt like, God, we're in this cycle of us wishing we still had the skunks around and the super skunks and the blueberries, right? And the juicy fruits and just certain genetics a lot of us older guys grew up on that sour diesel are no longer around, or are around, but not in the way we remember them. And it feels like this is nonstop. Exactly. But it feels like this is nonstop happening, where some of the great strains that have been phased out over the last 10 years, Gorilla Glue, a strain that I think didn't deserve to be phased out in the way it did, right? There's some strains that are all hype, and it's like, God, how did this, because it's super purple or because of whatever, weird characteristics.
Flavors.
Yeah, but it's like, we're losing a lot.
Grapes for a while.
Yeah, the strains from 15 years ago right now that were hot, 5% of them are alive, 10% maybe.
I wouldn't say they're gone completely. People like me are holding them in their gardens. Like I said, I started Select Strains here in LA back in 2004. Mm-hmm. From my knowledge, I was the very first one doing cuttings in LA, because the people from Berkeley Patients Group and the guy Don Duncan and his girlfriend at the time, Gen X Cuttings, he didn't come down to LA for months before I was already doing the Select Strains. I was running around to places like the Yellow House before it got raided and gone, and then what became the pharmacy, forget his name, I think he's passed away now, Michael Omaha. And they
legacy spot, the pharmacy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you know LA back in the day, that's the spot. Yeah. And so you were selling cuts to them where people were actually able to now propagate clones and not have to seed chase every single crop.
Well, so you got to realize in Amsterdam, Positronics, we sold a lot of clones. Mm-hmm. That was part of we sold grow equipment, and we taught you how to use it. And the whole thing was quite the experience. It was like a little mini mall of marijuana. We had a publication called Soft Secrets, soft being soft drugs, secrets, like no one knows what the fuck is going on. And we reproduced a lot of editorials from around the Netherlands in order to get the coffee shop owners to ask for equal treatment, because in some liberal places they'd be allowing this, in some more conservative places they'd be cracking down on that, and we would let everybody know what was happening. So it was more of like a magazine for the people that were in the industry. And he was also, there was something called the Baysay Day, which was the Coffee Shop Consumers Union, which was really an organization of coffee shop owners who were trying to like promote activism to a degree, because a lot of the guys were just trying to keep their head below the and not get shot and make profits. But Bernard's attitude was, look, if we aren't proactive, we'll get plowed under. Yeah,
very much so. And look what they're dealing with now.
And it was cool. And it was with Bernard, we started a thing called MediWeed. And what MediWeed is, so I got a prescription from a Dutch doctor in November of 2004 when I was at the first cup. His name was Dr. Trussell out of Rotterdam. And when I went to see him, I showed him my neck, and he checked me out, and he gave me a prescription for 10 grams a day. And, yeah.
That's hilarious. Of flour.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's just funny to think that. Like 10 grams a day, no more, no less. Yeah.
Oh, no, a lot more. But usually not less. And and we hit it off, and he was a really good guy. And I know it sounds weird, but at the time, a lot of my Dutch friends were like, why do you need a prescription? You go to the coffee shop, it's right there. And it was like, you don't get it. Yeah. And at the time, medical meant a lot to me. Even Jack, when I met Jack in 94, it was the Hemp Initiative. In 95, when my name was on the initiative, it was Jack, me, and the lawyers. Wow. Yeah, we filed with the Attorney General. I became a target pretty quick. And then I opened up the San Diego Compassion Club in March of 95. I also had a really wild, so Elvie Musica, who is one of the first people to get medical cannabis from the government, she was a compassionate investigational new drug program. She has glaucoma. She's like a mom to me. I met her in 1994 with Jack. They were going around trying to educate people. Blew my mind that because she had this prescription that she was legal and I wasn't. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Holland and I met him, the Dr. Trussell convinced me that, hey, it's an international prescription. It's legal to carry even in your own country. And I was like, wild. I didn't believe him. I didn't bring any back. So we go back, and in January of 95, me and Elvie and this guy, Richard Davis, I mentioned, who had the Traveling Hemp Museum, we went up to the Sacramento law libraries and we looked up fucking everything we could about international prescriptions, customs, the Single Treaty Geneva Convention, the 1979 Psychotropic Substances, and everything. So the way it worked was the Geneva Convention basically says see opiates. If you look up opiates, it has all these exemptions for opiates that cannabis will fall under. So if you have a prescription from an international doctor, you should be able to bring it to your country just like you would opiates and not have a problem. So I really came away from the law library visits with LV realizing this is fucking legal. Like a part of this is that line from Bob Marley where he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. And it's fucking true. And it blew my mind. And I was just like, you know, part of becoming free is believing I'm free.
It takes that belief though to get through the door, because the first guy through the door, the first guy to say, you know what, I know this law is wrong or isn't there, but they're still going to press you about it.
100%.
And so you got to be the one to be able to be like, no worries, I'm the one for that.
And at the time, like Dennis, my friends Dennis and John Entwistle, Dennis Perone and John Entwistle up in...
Dennis Perone, legendary guy in cannabis.
And back then, he's just one of my friends I met through Jack. You know, we weren't working on the initiative that became 215 yet. We would they would help with the Jack's initiative because we had nothing else going on. And at the time, we were only requiring at the dispensary you to get a medical not a recommendation, but a letter of your condition from your doctor, and then we'd let you have weed. When I brought in the prescription, this is when Dr. Todd McCormick, who's one of my good friends until he passed away, started writing recommendations, because this changed the thing, because it was more powerful for a doctor to recommend you smoke the pot than just to say, hey, you got cancer. And we switched. And then at the time, LV got invited to debate the Southeast Quadrant leader of the DEA at the University of Miami. His name was Wayne Rokes. And she calls me up and says, hey, will you come be my backup? And I said, yeah.
That's like enemy territory, Florida compared to California.
At the time,
Holy
University
shit.
of Miami, #1 funded CIA university. Dude, I'm not scared. I showed up with my weed and my international prescription, and I sat next to LV. I've got video. And it was me, LV, Wayne Rokes, and a guy that called himself Consupsa, and then who was just a fucking plant for the DEA, and then an impartial doctor who was anything but impartial. And I videotaped it because at the time I was running around with video cameras because I was a well-funded little hippie. And it was funny because Wayne Rokes was not prepared for my international prescription bullshit. He was kind of using LV as a, hey, we're working on it. You just shut up. We'll get back to you when we have research about medical cannabis. But for now, she gets it. We're doing research. Go away. And then I show up and say, hey, I got an international prescription. And I challenged him. I said, will you arrest me if I fly to Holland and pick up my prescription and come back? And I swear to God, if looks could kill, I would have turned into dust right at the end of the table. And he said, oh, no, I'm not going to arrest you. I said, well, you're kind of the head of the DEA. Are your guys going to arrest me? Because I kind of figure you're not the one that's going to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, no.
Clever word chip.
And I said, okay, you're all my witnesses. I'm going to fly to Holland. I'll pick up my medicine. And we'll see if he's...
Wow.
Yeah. So I went back to LV's house and literally called the airlines, called Martin Air at the time, owned by KLM. And they... I wanted a flight from Miami to Amsterdam. And no shit, she says, smoking or non-smoking? And I say, you can smoke on a plane? She goes, yeah, international flight's over 9.5 hours. I was like, well, I've got a Dutch physician's prescription for medical cannabis that I'm supposed to use every 2 hours. Would that be okay? And she was like, cannabis? I said, yeah, you smoke it. She's like, would you be willing to show your prescription to the stewardess? I said, oh, absolutely. I'll make her a copy. She go, hold the line. She came back. She goes, yeah, you can smoke it, but you got
this is amazing.
I got video. I got fucking video of it. And I said to her, because nobody believed this shit. It was ridiculous. And I said, okay. She said, but you got to sit in the smoking section. You can't smoke the cannabis in the non-smoking section. I said, no problem. That's right. So when I got to the airport, they delayed the flight like 3 hours, and I thought they're going to blow me up. And instead, and there was this pretty Dutch girl there. So I went and talked to her because, you know, pretty girls need friends too. And so I was like,
more friends than anybody. Yeah.
And she ended up working at a coffee shop. And she was in like Bahamas and blah, blah, blah. And I told her, and so we hit it off talking about weed. And I said, I'm going to smoke weed on the plane going home. She's like, how are you going to pull that off? I was like, I got a prescription from my Rotterdam doctor.
That's like a bucket list checkbox.
Oh, dude, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so she's like, can I sit with you? She was like, I want to smoke too. So we asked politely if we could change because I said it was my girlfriend, blah, blah. So I let her sit next to me. She was the one recording me. I took out Richard Davis's weed, started breaking it up. As soon as the thing went up and the no smoking signs like went off, I was just like breaking up the weed. And the guy next to me offered me a cigarette. I said no. I offered him a bud. He said no. We were cool the rest of the flight. And she videotaped me, and I even have video of like the bud on my little tray and my like the whole thing going. And like while we were flying over Rhode Island, because it shows the map, and I was like, weed map. And I flew home I flew to Amsterdam, had no issues, went, saw my doctor, told him what happened. He's like, are you sure you're going to bring it back? I was like, we'll see. What's up? You know, Elvie brings her weed everywhere she goes. I got to be what? I got to have the courage of an old lady? The fuck? So yeah. And the short answer is yes. So he was like, wow. Okay. So I picked up some cannabis from a guy, Marcel DeWitt, who was in Rotterdam at the time. And I proceeded to fly home. But first I went to the first expo in Frankfurt, Germany. It was an organic expo, and they allowed hemp in it for the first time. And I drove there with a reporter from Amsterdam, and we went. It was fucking awesome. And Lester Grinspoon was there. It was like the emergence of the rest of society in Europe, realizing that hemp was an environmental resource that you could make clothes and other textiles with, and was accepting of it. It was
beyond
awesome.
A drug.
Yeah.
What do you think of what's happening in Germany now?
It's awesome. Legalization.
It is pretty cool, right?
I have a lot of customers actually. I've sent a lot of seeds to Germany, and I think it's phenomenal. You know, I love my European friends. I mean, I'm a Euro mutt. I'm Italian, French.
I just love to see it outside of its normality, meaning like Spain has been that for a while and is like tinkering with, are we legal? Are we not? It's gray area. It's black market. They're
mean to the people at the club.
Yeah. And then Amsterdam, same thing. There's this struggle of like, it could have flourished as damn near the world's epicenter for cannabis at one point, where it felt like this is the only place where you can really be free and love this plant and dedicate your life and have a career and flourish on what you love. And then now it's been so suppressed, and you go there now and you realize like, oh, it's like early 90s at best America, as far as like where they are. It's not
that bad. When
it's not that bad, but it hasn't progressed a lot in 20 years.
Well, it's going backwards in a lot of ways. When I moved there in 96, I felt like I moved into the future. I could walk into a coffee shop with my little hemp briefcase, open it up. I had an Apple computer and a cell phone, and I could sit there and be editor-in-chief of a magazine behind my little thing, smoking a joint, meeting strangers.
And you're like, this is how it should be.
It was awesome. And it's what we're deprived of here in California. Yes. Culture should not be illegal. And the fact that you can walk into a bar and order a Budweiser and strike up a conversation with a stranger, I should be able to do that at a cannabis club. I should be able to go order an orange juice like I always do, and order some bud and sit there and meet someone I've never met before. And, personally, I think that is the next step. And, there's so many elements of cannabis prohibition that has bothered me to my soul. I mean, and a lot of my friends are not white. And to see how my friends that are not white have been repressed and oppressed, it's shit. I mean, in the 90s, I had no activist friends that were black because they couldn't even get to the point of saying shit, and they were getting hassled. It fucking sucked. And this is also why I lost a lot of friends around Prop 64 and around Prop 19, because it really drew a line in the sand. And I realized a lot of these people growing weed were no better than the prison guards that were fucking arguing that we should all be criminals. And their argument was, y'all should all be criminals because I want to get a lot of money for my weed. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I this
is Florida in a nutshell right now.
Well, it was
for a lot of people where like these huge corporations get in, and then they want to close the door behind them, though. They don't want more licenses to get issued or any type of free market competitiveness. Like with a guy with 40 and 60 and 100 lights, yeah, you should be able to have to compete with a guy who wants to put up 5,000 lights. Like, too bad, so sad. It's the same with making shoes. Like, there's small batch guys making shoes that are very sought after. It just kills me when it's like, you know what? It's going to be $30 million to enter that market. It's like, what are you talking about?
To me, it's wrong on many levels. And when I still outside of supermarkets, our fantasies of freedom were so that we could have backyard gardens and not get hassled. It wasn't about shiny retail stores trying to get 1994 deadlock prices for an eighth of weed. And it bothers me that a lot of the people getting into this are drooling over prohibition era profits and still trying to, hey, look, if you're paying $50 an eighth, that's $6,400 a pound. That's what we were paying literally at Jerry Garcia concerts in 92 and 3 when I was running around Jason King of the Canna Bible, and we were getting high as fuck. And, and But it bothers me now in a legal market that they're not just looking at it like, hey, let's sell a lighter. What's the cost of production on the lighter? Oh, $2. Okay, let's sell it for $6 and go on vacation. These people are, you know, making it for relatively low amounts of money and then trying to charge $3 and $5.
Same thing to the shop though.
It
The
bothers.
shop wants 100% markup. It's like, well, what liquor store or what product do you mark up everything minimum 100% across the board?
Well, and what bothers me about that is you're paying a lot more on taxes on a $6,000 pound going out the door than you would on a $600 pound going out the door. And it's bullshit. We're doing it to ourselves. And what also bothers me, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about authentic genetics, is because I'm trying to do this because I consider some of these varieties what I call public domain genetics. I do not use open source. When I was a kid, I was into computers. I'm still a geek. I used to code, you know, make my own websites in the early 90s. And open source is if somebody does the work and creates a program and then gives it to the world. Well, nobody fucking invented cannabis, okay? So this bullshit of open source is really not where it's at. Really what cannabis starts at, in my opinion, is public domain genetics from all over the world. You're a human, I'm a human, we're all earth rings, we're all equal in this, we're all breathing the same air, pissing the same color, bleeding the same color, shitting the same color. We're not that fucking different. And realistically, cannabis, it affects all of us. We all have an endocannabinoid system. And realistically, I mean, I grew up with great admiration for people from India and Afghanistan and Pakistan and the Hindu Kush Mountains and Nepal and Jamaica and these places that I associated with being like original cannabis culture.
Yes.
And I will never change. You know, I don't care what color they came in or what language they were speaking. I mean, to me, we're all family.
Yes.
You know, and I'll never change that vibe. I mean, even especially when I was a little kid, you could roll up to me on a wheelchair, one arm missing, you know, looking a funky color I've never seen. I could only color you company, you know, because man, life is short and that's just reality. And for me, I mean, you look at cannabis and all the beautiful places it's come from. To me, we should be rejoicing in its diversity and not trying to homogenize it all like fucking we see in the market today. All of this, it has to be done in 9 weeks and be as heavy as possible.
It has to be purple.
Hate it.
I mean, literally like has to be at this point. It's crazy because us growing up and like, let's say before big purple waves, there were always outliers that turned purple or there were, you know, swings in temperature. You would get purples, but not to the point where it has to be, you know, covered in purple. And now for that to be something that you're having to have, it's crazy.
Well, truth be told, I can almost make any variety go purple in final stages if you just bring your room into the low 60s. Instead of 72, go at 62. And technically, it's flavonoid expression. And a lot of people in this industry seem to think flavin means flavor, but it has nothing to do with it. Flavin is actually a Greek word for yellow, and it means color. So flavonoids are color expressions. And
so it's just turning it on or turning it up.
It's expressing. So thiols are an interesting part of that conversation too, because going back to Skunkman Sam, there's a lot of people that used to say, oh, he bred the skunk out of skunk, and he didn't. And realistically, what happened is when you get into the first wave of cannabis coming into our country, it was tropical. It was Vietnam, Thai, Cambodian, Laos. It was the soldiers coming back from Vietnam. It was Mexican, Acapulco Gold, Jamaican. It was all tropical varieties. But then the hippies on the hippie trail started bringing back Afghans. And even like Seattle Greg didn't get purist indica until 79. So in the late 70s, according to Rob Clark, author of Marijuana Botany, Hashish and everything, he didn't, and he went to UC Santa Cruz and graduated 76. His first book was his thesis, The Botany and Ecology of Cannabis. It's phenomenal. He even took the time to hand draw all the illustrations because he couldn't get them. It's phenomenal. Only 1,500 printed. I've implored him to print it again, and he might, but fortunately he's working on a follow-up to Marijuana Botany called Cannabis Botany that'll come out pretty soon. And I'm excited. Is
Sam the Skunkman still alive?
Yeah, David Watson is absolutely. He's going to come visit me pretty soon. He was with me. Just
shout out to you, big dog. I don't know if you hear this a lot, but just want to say, like, if he, God forbid, he gets his clip, amazing to hear the work he's put in. And now I'm hearing it from multiple different sources, you know, after 170 interviews. And it's just a chapter in cannabis that I don't think is talked about enough. You
know, I appreciate you saying that. I've known him for now since 94. And I think the world of him. I've learned a lot from him. His passion for cannabis is unmatched. His knowledge is encyclopedic. He is so generous. You know, he jokes that he only sold seeds by the kilo, and he was selling seeds for 10 cents each, going way back. I mean, David's whole goal was that cannabis was a helpful healing agent, and he wanted to spread it all over the world. You know, he's an acid-eating hippie, doesn't do hard drugs, doesn't drink alcohol, doesn't smoke tobacco, literally with his same wife. I was on Skype with him a few days ago. 54 years now, has 2 wonderful daughters.
Is still doing any work or just preserving genetics still?
He's retired. He retired from his company, Hortifarm, is probably still an active BV, which means incorporated in Holland. But you can't buy genetics from him or seeds or anything like that. No, in the 80s, when he got to Holland, he went from Sacred Seeds to Cultivator's Choice. Cultivator's Choice was growing seeds in greenhouses and selling seeds by the kilo to all of the upstart homegrown, you know, all of the seed companies that came. Like Neville wasn't the first. There was Lowland Seed Company before there was Neville, technically. Neville what was innovative about Neville is he had the courage to sell seeds to America, and he had the audacity to advertise in High Times. And it was Greg saw his ad in High Times for the 4 seeds for $1, which is how he contacted Neville in the first place. And the guy that ended up turning in Neville, Raymond Anthony Cogo, he actually called the number in the High Times thing and struck up a conversation with Neville. And the whole thing was probably a trap that Neville didn't realize he was walking into. But the guy flew out to Holland, made friends with Neville. And then in time, Neville asked him if he would be his trusted source for sending seeds to his American customers, because he would send the seeds over in cans in bulk, and then they would receive them and they would send them. He would send over either letters at first, but then they got a fax machine that was like high tech, and they would fax over the amount of seeds and the address in code, so to speak, or at least according to the affidavit from Raymond Anthony Cogo that I read in 2018. And he would then fulfill the orders from Michigan. And
I bet a lot of law enforcement at that time didn't even know what they were looking at if they saw packs of seeds. And so did this guy get busted though and then flipped?
According to his affidavit, because
he wasn't undercover from the beginning.
I have nothing to go with other than his affidavit. Okay. His affidavit was signed January of 1994. I was working for Grow Magazine in 2018, and I wrote this article titled Legacy of a Legend, a history of Neville. When Neville died, I felt bad. Ben Dronkers called me on fucking April 1st and woke me up and said Neville passed. And we both had a moment, because we were like, this is not someone about in a magazine. This is a person I've played chess with and smoked with. It was like, it hit home for both Ben and I. And I wrote the article, and if you know, it's in the old magazines and shit, but it's a tribute in a way. It wasn't damaging in any way, you know. But
what you uncovered wasn't the proudest stuff.
No, not so much that. I was arguing with a guy on Facebook. He was saying Skunkman Sam termed in Neville. And I was like, fuck you, don't say that. You know, David would never do that. I've known him for 30 years. It was a bullshit rumor. And the guy fancied himself a bit of an attorney. He was a paralegal. He went to pacer.gov. Anyone watching this can do it themselves. He spent like $29.60, I think. And he downloaded the 2 indictments and the affidavit from the witnesses in Neville's case. He hit me up a week later and he said, hey, I'm never going to spread that rumor again. And I was like, that's cool, but how are you so sure? I'm only sure because I know David. Yeah. And he was like, I'll send you over the affidavit of the witness. It was his own employee. This guy Cogo turned him in. And according to the affidavit, he was not busted. He went to the DEA in June of 89 or whatever on his own accord, and he saved all of the addresses from all of Neville's customers for 18 months and then turned them into the DEA.
Come on, buddy.
No, it gets worse.
That's insane.
It gets worse. It gets worse because back then they were paying 10% for a seizure. So they go get your boat and your hot car and your house. They give this fucking asshole money.
So he had a game plan from the beginning. You wouldn't just hold on to all that stuff.
According to his affidavit, Neville asked him to destroy the addresses and the names after he sent it, but he saved them and then used them against Neville. Now, in the affidavit, when you're reading it, it's about his activities in 87, 88, and 89 with Neville. But then when you read the date of it, it's January of 94, which means they kept him a confidential informant for fucking 5 years. And this son of a bitch literally still has a nutrient company
Oh God, really?
Called Kogo's, it's called Kogo's Original or some bullshit like that. And he's still on the internet. And when I released that article, he started contacting Grow Magazine saying he was going to sue us and all this. But dude, all I was a journalist, and all I did was report what I read in the fucking affidavit. That's it. And what happened is it happened right around when Neville died, and it went into the article, and he was mad as fuck. And he's been attacking me on the internet, saying I cooperated. Dude, I went to prison for 5 fucking years. I'm the opposite of you.
You could have had time served if you did cooperate.
I could have never
offered that.
In all reality, I probably would have never gone to prison, but I committed suicide shortly thereafter because there's no fucking way.
3 years plus is a long time.
I did 5.
Yeah, exactly. You know what's crazy about this when you tell me this is Neville puts this ad out. And when they say not all attention is good attention, or what, he attracts an amazing connection with Sam the Skunkman.
Well, no, that wasn't from the ad. He met him through probably Rosenthal via other people.
Okay.
Ed Rosenthal, believe it or not, was in Amsterdam initially with the coffee shops reporting. And Ed's been around for a long time.
Yes.
I mean, me and Ed have been friends 30 years.
Well, if you meet him, you know that. Yeah, he's a vintage dude.
He's ancient. Yeah. And but he was already there, and he tried to start the marijuana hemp museum that Ben ended up purchasing from Ed and stuff. It's a funny story. Ben didn't start the marijuana hemp museum in Amsterdam. He bought it from Ed in all reality. Oh. So Ed was there. Ed got the Durban poison, I think, in 79 and brought the seeds back to Jim because Jim was the grower, botanist, and Ed was just the editor and published.
So Jim bred that, or who?
Yeah, Jim started working with it. Jim was the grower, not Ed. I mean, I love Ed, but Ed would say the same thing.
No, good partnerships. It's like nothing taken away from the other person. Sometimes it takes 2 people. Like you're talking about Seattle Greg's work and Sam the Skunkman and the stuff that ended up getting kind of collaborated upon.
Well, they never collaborated. They didn't even know each other.
But the work kind of moved through each other.
Well, I would say this is that the Afghan that David had was probably in no way related to the Afghan that Greg had. Because when you get into it, David was actually in Afghanistan and collecting genetics himself. David's this really rare bird, you know, like this is pre-invasion of Russia. This is when, and he said they were really, really nice people to the Americans at the time. They were very warm to the hippies. It was fucking beautiful. Like tells really nice stories of the whole thing. You know, all of this like xenophobia and shit we deal with. I think I hate it. And it's like, I wish it would all melt away because there's incredible rich histories that would be fascinating to discover and study if there wasn't so much like us and them.
With all the wars and everything that's happened since David was over there, most of that stuff, would you say, is lost? The genetics that were being grown at that time and stuff that he had procured through that travel?
I would say you're right. And also mitigated by the fact that the Dutch genetics spread, because even people like, you got to realize Morocco wasn't growing hash until the 60s, and they were quick to update their genetics. And a lot of reasons why you can't find really good, what you would call sativa, what I would call tropical equatorial varieties in Jamaica, is because Jamaica was quick to adopt a lot of the Dutch genetics and try to grow faster, better weed. And now you see, when you see pictures of Jamaica, there's these 4-foot plants with the bud on it. And it's because they're putting these northern plants outside with no veg time, and they're just going right into flower. And it's sad because what would really flourish there are tropical equatorial genetics like original
But
Haze.
they take longer, and they sometimes...
Well, they flower and they grow simultaneously so they can deal with the tropical climate. The plants that stop what they're doing and start to flower, like Purist Indica, NL2, Hindu Kush, and all the northern varieties, need that veg time, you know, and realistically, this is what stunts the plants because they're northern plants growing in the tropics. What would work is tropical plants growing in the tropics. And unfortunately, because they were quick to try to improve upon what they had, they lost what was great, in my humble opinion. And I have a lot of people that have brought original Haze seeds back because, you know, that was my goal. I had gotten it in 2012. And when he told me the story, he gave me a lot of seeds, like thousands of them. And it was kind of clear that he wasn't comfortable because I asked him what happened with Neville and when Neville got Haze. And he said, I gave it to him, you know, ask Rob, he was with me with sometime in 87. Well, I know Rob well. I know he moved there in September of 87. So that puts it at the end of 87. And I happen to have all of Neville's catalogs because I'm a fanboy. So I went and I looked it up. And there's no word Haze in 84, 85, 86, or 87. And there's no word Haze in his 20-something word article in High Times, which is really what got him the attention in March of 87. Go back and read it. There's no fucking Haze mentioned. And if he had had this incredible variety, he would have mentioned it. And the reality is he didn't. And we don't see Haze appearing in his catalog until 88. And it's as a male. It's Northern Lights crossed with Haze, Skunk crossed with Haze. So it made sense. And he didn't want him to be able to recreate the variety because he didn't feel like it was his to give away. Yeah. So I didn't do it either. And then when the Hemp Farm Bill passed and seeds kind of became legal, I Skyped him and said, hey, can I do a reproduction of original Haze and make them available? Because I mean, it's the one thing that's lost in this whole market. And he was like, only if you do it my way. I said, well, what's your way? He says, at least 2,000 plants in an open pollination in a greenhouse controlled. And I was like, I can do that. He goes, I know you can. That's why I gave you so many seeds, because I knew this call would come one day. And I was like, you fucking kill me. And he was just like, and so I did what he said. And I said, why 2,000? He says, because if not, you'll lose the genome. He's like, you lose part of it. He goes, you can do one-to-one breeding, but you're kind of bottlenecking every time you do it. He goes, if you're preserving, go with as many plants as you can go with. He said he used to do it in a 50,000 square foot greenhouse with tens of thousands of plants. And that's how he would IBL the Hazes. And see, the thing is that different genetics will react differently to the same experience, so to speak. So in some cases, like with Skunk 1, you have really good uniformity and consistency treating it as an IBL. Even with multiple males and multiple females, it's amazing. I mean, it's a rarity in cannabis. If you start getting into cannabis and trying to do what David did, you realize that was a good trick. That's why that was the most.
Some people stepped up to the plate and hit home runs. Yeah,
it's mold and mildew resilient. It grows everywhere. I mean, even Aryan, it was on one of his strain hunters, and he goes to go see what all the locals are growing. It's Skunk 1. They called it Exodus cheese, but guess what that is? Skunk 1.
Exodus cheese is Skunk 1.
Yeah, of course. Milo, Big Buddha, I miss him. We were friends. We were friends from Europe. He came to my THC Expo. I partied with him in Ibiza. I like Milo. Milo was really cool. But he leaned over and told me once, because Todd, it is Skunk 1 cutting. And he got it from the guy that was doing the Red Eye Press, which was a magazine. God, what's his name? Nick. And Nick passed away of cancer. We were friends as well. And,
so Big Buddha cheese is Exodus cheese is Skunk 1.
Yeah.
How funny is that it goes through, and it makes so much sense that our skunk Thiol is their cheese Thiol.
Exactly,
which is the fragrance for layman's terms.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you look at it.
It is, and the history of this is just stuff I dig. I absolutely love. I mean, we were going into the Canna Bibles. You and I could talk for days. I want to ask him. I just want to solidify Seattle Greg's legacy is Northern Lights.
So Greg, so
that's unbelievable, Todd, because
he made up the name.
A lot of strains I'm finding out that I fell in love with early were either Northern Lights relabels or crosses.
It had a huge influence. When I asked Skunkman Sam, I said once, what do you think would have been the most popular cannabis variety if you hadn't bred Skunk 1? He said Northern Lights. It was already very popular. He goes, when it hit in the mid 80s, Todd, it was just really good. But
short flowering times, right?
Well, so
quick flowering times.
Going back to the purest indica, I don't like using the words indica sativa because I'm a bit more, narrow leaf, broad leaf drug varieties. Call it from where it came from, But then, so Greg,
yes, I want to, just because that's such a huge legacy that no one talks about. I mean, I'm blown away by a lot of Seattle Greg stuff that I hear about.
I'm completely. So what happened with how I met Greg? I was, as a journalist for Grow Magazine, I was always interested in trying to get stories. I contacted the Indoor Sun Shop to see if Steve Murphy Stevens was his pen name, his real name, Steve Murphy, if he would interview with me. His son said, no, Todd, he's in no condition to do interviews. And I said, all respect, and I was trying to see if I could get to Seattle Greg, and I was quizzing Skunkman Sam because he was there. And one night on Skype, he had a brain fart, and he said, McAllister. And I was like, what? And he's like, he's a Mick like you. And I was like, oh, he is he? And he's like, Greg McAllister, that's it. And I was like, so now I wrote it down because I take notes when I talk to David all the time. And then one day I wrote that article about Neville, and it was a link on my Facebook page, and someone named Greg McAllister left a thing saying about Neville, may Northern Lights live forever through you, Neville, And I read it and went, the fuck out of here. So I called up and I was like, can I call you? And he was like, sure. So I video called him, and I was like, sir, do you happen to be the guy that gave Neville Northern Lights. He said, yeah. And I was like, wow, my name's Todd McCormick. He's like, stop, Todd. I've been following you for 25 years. I know exactly who you was. I know your mom's name's Ann. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, do you?
He's like, I'm looking at you right now. No.
Yeah, it was really funny. And we were video chatting through Facebook. And I was like, well, do you still have the genetics? And he said, no.
Yeah.
And I was like, heartbreaking.
That's to be expected.
And I said, well, did you ever get skunk and haze from Neville? And his first thing he said, Neville didn't have haze when I met him. And we never talked about haze. He goes, and he wouldn't give me skunk. And I was like, well, I have both, right, from Skunkman. So if you want, I'll send you some seeds. And he was like, you will? I was like, fuck yeah, dude, you're a hero to me. And he was like, please do. So I sent him some skunk one and some haze. And 18 months, 20 months, just sometime later, he calls me up and he says, hey, Todd, my sister passed. And I said, man, I'm sorry. He said, well, thanks for the condolences, but that's not why I called. Because my family found some of my seeds in our freezer. I said, really? I said, what are they? He said, Todd, it's the original purest indica, my first hybrid, what I called NL2, and Herbie's cross, which is what I called NL5. And I was like, how old are they? He goes, Todd, they would have went there before I met Neville, which puts it at 83. And NL5, because he went to the indoor sun shop all the time, was one of the first ones he got from Herbie. The 5 was just grading. So it, because he was in constant contact with the guy, he made the cross, gave him some seeds back. I was like, how's the germination?
Yeah.
And he was like, half,
of
maybe.
Course.
And I was like, and what's up with this? He's like, I want to send you some. And I was like, okay, here's my address.
Wow.
So he sent them to me and I got them and some more. He has now sent me his entire collection because he loves me and he wants to make sure they carry on, which is even crazier. But he sent them to me and I grew them. I mean, I didn't, I have no reason to doubt the man. He's 76 now.
Yeah.
Everything lines up.
Well, you're looking at the expression of, I'm sure, the veg and stuff, and it's starting. The purest
indica looks like a Neanderthal, dude. It doesn't look like modern cannabis at all. It looks like, if you look at pictures of Afghan plants, they drape, they have long leaflets. It looks like they're wearing an Afghan gown or something like that. These in my greenhouse did exactly that. The buds were huge, full of resin. When you break up the buds, your fingers smell like hash. I was about to say,
what were some of the smells coming off of them?
Old school hash.
Yeah.
That thiol.
Spice.
So it gets crazier. So I grew them all out, and you can look on my website for this. There's SC Labs analysis of my purest indica number 3, female, which was, I number everything. So it was just one of the many I have. And then I had OG Kush, and I was flowering them both close to each other, and I was touching the purest indica, and for the first 6 weeks, it smelled exactly like the OG Kush, so much that I thought, I'm high. And then at peak maturity, it didn't smell the same because the purest indica makes thiols and starts to smell kind of like shit, funky, acrid, whatever you want to describe it as. But then after about 3 weeks of drying, it smelled like OG Kush again. And I was like, okay, I'm losing my fucking mind.
They like off gassed or something?
The thiols dissipate.
Yeah.
And the thiols, so part of the reason why I believe we had skunky smelling cannabis in the 80s is because when you got weed back then, it was sticky, it was wet, it was moist. You had to use scissors to break it up because we didn't want to sit on pounds of weed at our house. It was a felony. So we tried to get out of that shit 3, 4, 5 days after cutting it. So a majority of kind bud was fresh bud. It wasn't cured for 3 weeks and put in jars and burped or any of that bullshit.
Maybe your head stash was, but the rest of it went out.
Well, right. Thiols, though, were still present and because it was still fresh. But now when we dry and cure cannabis, the thiols evaporate away and it goes to a more terpene expression, which is why cannabis didn't have that funky smell. And also in the 90s, we moved towards synthetic nutrients. We went from organics when I was growing in 84, 85, 86, 78, because I would throw in bat, guano, seabird shit, you name it, I'd throw it in. And I didn't know better. I just wanted a rich mixture. I couldn't measure the shit.
Yeah.
I knew I needed a lot of it. And if it burned it, it was all mix all day.
Let me tell you. Shit over here.
And I was learning. And but then when you get to the 90s and now they're scientifically making the nutrients, sulfur became one of the things they took away because it tends to acidify your medium. And cannabis is not an acid-loving plant; it is a neutral-loving plant. So if you put too much sulfur in your medium, it'll fuck up its ability to uptake the other nutrients. But you
need it for expressions and terpenes.
Well, this is not so much terpenes. as much as we learned thiols, because the way we learned about thiols in 2021, there's a research paper that came out of Torrance that named thiols as this non-terpenoid that's responsible for scents. We didn't know collectively what the fuck it was that caused it until this research paper, which wasn't that long ago. And thiols were responsible. And the way we became knowing of this is that hops and cannabis are closely related. Some call them cousins, so to speak. But when beer drinkers discovered this skunky smelling beer that would come out in like pale ales and sunshine,
IPAs and stuff,
it gives it this musky smell. All right, well, beer drinkers like this, and the beer industry, having deep pockets, did a lot of research into what molecule on the hops plant is making this, and they determined it was a thiol. And if you go on Google like I did and you type in manipulating the thiol content in hops, there are literally thousands of Google scholarly articles explaining what because as soon as they figured out what it was, they were like, okay, like we are in THC land.
Turn the expression up.
Exactly.
Wow, that would parallel cannabis then for any of the research or any of the movements, because they're so closely related.
And that's where all this information about sulfur that I was just expressing came from, because in all reality, when you sit there and do the reading like I do, because I love to read, I'm a geek, it really shows that you can make these applications. And what's interesting is you can unlock thiols in almost all cannabis, because it's all capable of making it to a certain degree. Get what I mean? And the micronutrients in the soil really make a difference. Like I went full circle. I went from, rich organics, hoping it was organic. I didn't really care in the 80s. It was whatever you had, to synthetic nutrients and hydroponics. And now I'm to roots organic lush. And then I'll amend if I want to, because now I've been playing with adding sulfur and seeing what you can do. It's like a gas pedal on a race car. How fast can I go through the corner before fucking up the race car?
People don't talk about micronutrients enough.
No.
I mean,
but it turns out
they're trying to dumb it all down and derive it all down. Yeah, it's interesting.
It turns out that's hugely complex. And when you start getting into mycorrhizal and all these funguses and stuff, when you take them out of the soil, the cannabis plant cannot express as well. And it's even interesting because there's a lot of research on if you add too much nutrients, like humic acid, lowers the cannabinoids across the board. And it's one of the most common additives because it provides better uptake. So there's like a trade-off in the whole process. And it's really fascinating. And like, I treat my seedless cannabis different than I treat my seeded cannabis. For instance, I let my seedless cannabis nutrients kind of poop out and just ride it out, because of the research showing that it's not beneficial to overly nutriate at the end cycle, because for whatever reason, the cannabinoids express higher with the nutrients going down. Fascinating. But with my seeds, I feed like fucking mad all the way, and I give them 3 extra weeks, because I'm not growing the flowers, I'm growing the seeds.
This is more of a pregnancy.
Yeah, and I want that seed to be as mature and fully formed and ripe as possible. And I throw the cannabis away. I know it sounds crazy. I keep the hash. but I don't really care about the vegetable material per se. I just want the seeds and the trichromes, and it's a happy day. But with my seedless cannabis, no, that gets driven differently.
Todd, have you had any run-ins, or have you done anything with Breeder Steve? Do you know much? Because like what got brought up was, I say this because what I was told was, the original candy expressions that we know that everyone's loving, the lemon cherries and the runts, and that what we would consider a candy strain, right? That Breeder Steve was originally working a lot of that line, and that was some of his stuff. Do you remember any old school strains that were along the lines of how big this candy wave is, like that profile?
Well, not to sound, not to dismiss Breeder Steve, but when I first moved to Amsterdam and first visited there in '94, one of the first things that stood out was, in all reality, how sweet everything was. Even Skunk One didn't smell like skunk. And one of the things was, I was like, why do you call this Skunk One when it doesn't smell like skunk weed where I come from smells like skunks? But then the first thing you realize is your Dutch friends go, what the fuck is a skunk? And then you go, okay, well, I can see there's going to be an issue here in translation, but it was sweet. And now you got to understand it's because Skunkman Sam, when he put it together, Afghan, Colombian gold, Acapulco gold, stinky, sweet.
Yep.
And then while he's doing his breeding, he's selecting towards the terpenes that smell and taste like fruits and foods and flowers and not shit. And in all reality, you and I go on a hike, I doubt you're going to stop and stick your nose in some deer shit. But you might stop and smell some flowers. And humans have an aversion to thiols because it's a warning that the food or it could be going bad and we should avoid it. And we love terpenes. It's like nature's love language, as the Emerald Cup has said, you know, because I get to be a judge in the Emerald Cup every year for the last decade. So kind of nice. And, but we've been dividing them up into terpene categories, which is fucking awesome because now it's like, instead of a plate with mixed fruit, it's like bananas and apples and oranges and lemons. And now I can be like, all of these are lemons, and judge them for what they are within that category. But
you had already seen it naturally gearing towards sweets because people have a natural inclination towards that profile compared to... And
because they were moving towards more like non-organic nutrients, and the plants were expressing terpenes more than they were thiols. So all of cannabis kind of took a turn as people started using more convenient nutrients. I was kind of, because that's what I deducted when you read the hops research, because why would there not be excessive sulfur? Well, because it's going to acidify the soil and the plant won't work in it. So we use what worked. So we decrease the nutrients that would cause burn, not knowing that, well, that throttle controls this, you know, because now sulfur is directly connected to thiol development in hops and cannabis. Becomes a really fascinating, you know, and it's, look, I've been growing 40 years plus now. I started January of 84. I feel like I'm a constant student because all this information is continuing to come down the pike. And as we learn it, it's fascinating. When I released original Haze, everybody complained I didn't really have Haze. Everybody's an asshole. And, but nobody says that anymore. And then I released Mel Frank Skunk One. The way I got the Skunk One, literally, I've known Mel Frank since November of 96. And when I met him at the Cannabis Cup, I came back to LA beginning in 97. He invited me over to come get some skunk seeds that he'd made that summer in the summer of 96. I went over there and then proceeded to get busted. Didn't have a chance to grow them, lost all my seeds to the government. Well,
God, what'd they even do with those? That's
probably
horrible.
Sent them to Missouri in Mississippi, and he's probably growing them to this day. But bastards. But you know, it is what it is. And well, he put those in his refrigerator. So Mel Frank got some skunk seeds from Skunkman Sam, Dave, in 88 and put them in his refrigerator until 96. He gets busy. And then reproduced them in the summer of 96, put those reproductions back in the refrigerator, and they sat there until 2019 when I went down there to go pick up some seeds. And me and Jim been good friends, and I live up in the Bay, and I have a big house with guest rooms, and he would always just come to me because Emerald Cup and the High Times events were all in the Bay that we were going to. And I drove up to his house, and I had a deja vu, and I was like, I've been here before, haven't I? And he looks at me, he holds up the vial, a 35 millimeter fume vial, and goes, Todd, you came up here a few weeks before you get busted to pick up these exact same seeds. And I was like, wow, 23 years later, talk about life interrupted. And he was like, yeah, I hope you get a chance to grow them this time.
Oh, epic.
And I was just like, holy shit. And I took them home and I, mothered them, and then I flowered them, and I realized they still smelled acrid. And acrid was how I would describe it because it's not sweet. It's, and people are like, oh, roadkill, if it's not this or that. But it's like, I think that they live off of fantasies of what they think they remember. It's like, ex-girlfriends are always great when you think of but there's a reason she's your ex.
Oh, the smell goes by and you reminisce some perfume or something and then you're like, wow, that was amazing. And then you go back to that time though, and you were running a whole different, it was a whole different thing. I want to talk about that though, because the micronutrients, a lot of the convo we have about sour diesel and why sour diesel isn't what it once was or what we remember as sour diesel. And this is a few strains now where people are like, it's not what it used to be, or we don't.
Can I tell you what that is though?
But it's
misnomers, because
but it's also
like
we grow
Kush.
Different.
Well, no, because like I collected the sour diesel cutting sometime in like 06, 07. I've had it since, because I have a problem. I hoard plants. I've had a problem with this for.
Well, we're here to meet. We're actually here to meet about this, Todd. That's actually the underlining of this.
If this was an AA meeting, I would have to confess. I'm sorry. I have many. I'm still hoarding plants.
Yeah. You got to come up off of them.
Right. But when I got out of prison, I had like M39 Romulan ice plant. I had a super silver haze, and I had OG Kush, and that's what I was like peddling around LA at the time, and then I got busted in 06, my little nursery. I got probation for 3 years. Then I got busted in 09. I got probation for 3 years. And then I got busted again with Oaksterdam in 2012, and they prosecuted me for 5 fucking years because I wouldn't cooperate. Tony Serra was my attorney. I fucking love that guy. He won't represent you if you cooperate. He dumps you. Tony, they made the movie about him called True Believer back in the 80s. And the joke was that the murder cases pay, but the pot cases are free.
That's funny.
Totally. The guy is a hero to me.
Freedom fighter.
Yeah, dude, we lost all our emotions and had to go to trial. And I emailed and said, how much am I going to owe you to go to trial? He wrote me back and he said, Todd, I admire you and you're never going to have to pay me anything. I will defend you till the rest of our lives. And I fucking cried. And I was just like, it's amazing. I mean, like, I think the world of Tony Serra, and for him to have that attitude was incredible. And I had 3 felonies already, and I was facing a 4th, which isn't a good thing in California because it was pre-legalization and 3 strikes and all that. And Tony was like, you sure you want to go to trial? And I was like, there's no other choice, sir.
Wow.
And he was like, but
what's Todd's method to popping seeds?
Oh, easy. I use
because we're talking old genetics now. You talked about 20, 30, 40-year-old seeds. So those you handle the same as any seeds?
Yes, no. So if you look up, there's been a lot of really cool research about using hydrogen peroxide with a mix of water. I use a 1 part hydrogen peroxide, like 1 ounce hydrogen peroxide, 3%, with 2 ounces of distilled water because I don't want chlorine or chloride. I mix it together. I soak the seeds for like 24 to 48 hours. Depending on their age. I usually like to see if they pop a little bit. I want the hull to swell up, and there's like a little super seal that nature puts there, keeping the 2 halves of the coconut together. I want it to give up. And then I take those, I use the same water, I pour it in a paper towel, and I put the paper towel in a baggie. And I don't usually close it the whole way because I don't want it to get too wet. I want it to be moist, not wet. And I put it in a cabinet where it's dark usually, and then I check it every morning. And as soon as they sprout, I let them get about 1 inch long. And once they're 1 inch long, sometimes they get helmet head, I call them, where the little hull just doesn't want to give up from the little green leaf. And sometimes you got to be real fucking careful because I've broken them and I've been real mad at myself. But you got to split the little hull off because it'll fucking choke out the little plant and the plant can't make its little leaf. And you got to be like, not today, Satan. And then what I do is after the little bit of surgery, if it's needed, I plant it right side up in a jiffy because it doesn't need fertilizer, and fertilizers can actually inhibit the plant initially, the little seedling. So I put it in an inert jiffy, and I just water with like 6.3. And then as soon as the roots come through the jiffy, I repot it into like Roots Organic Lush. I love that shit. It's the best medium I've ever used. And it's really fantastic.
Which is a soil or a cocoa or soilless?
It's a lot of shit if you read it. Yeah.
I'll have to look into it.
It's fantastic. I mean, Austin, who founded the company, and I wouldn't say we're friends, but we've met each other. We've hung out. We've texted. He's a nice guy. He's now sold the company for like $250 million, and I think he lives on an island. But he's one of us.
We've seen it for a long time. Roots Organic's been around for a while.
Yeah, they were in Oregon, and he actually had his own lab where he's doing uptake testing on the plant. So when I visited the lab, when I visited the whole place, the facility, it was a long ass time ago, 2015. It was a long time ago. But his point was that if it's not necessary for the plant, why should I buy it to include it in the ingredients? What is necessary? What does the plant want and need, and how does it express differently? And it was a really cool experience to see what he was doing with that lab. And they really were all about the quality. And I got nothing but love. He actually he was one of the first investors in a Grow magazine, which is how I got an invitation to go up there and hang out with him, because I wrote for Grow magazine from when it started till, I don't know, for about 5 or 6 years, quite a long time. And I got very busy with the seeds and not so much anymore.
To take it back for a split second, is a Playboy party all that we've heard about? Is it?
Oh my God, dude. I went to the 45th anniversary party and there was only maybe 200 guys and over 1,000 women. And I swear I fell in love every time someone stepped out of the way of another one. And I was just like, this is insane. No, it's crazy. I mean, and a lot of the shit that people have said about him since, I think is sad because I didn't see that. And it may sound crazy, but I was really impressed, not with the mansion and the money, but the people around him. were fucking so loyal. Like his assistant, Joni Mathis, who passed away of cancer in September. I even went to her funeral at the Playboy Mansion. I mean, it was a sad day. But when I used to bring her cannabis before she was passing away and going through treatment, we had a nice bond. And she had been with him since 61. And then his secretary, Mary, since 58. And then the guy, Mark, that was his security since 63. I used to park my motorcycle next to his, and he was a bald guy. I really liked him. He was always really nice to me. Hank, who ran the mansion, had actually run the Chicago mansion and was the only manager that ever managed the Playboy Mansion West from 71 until it fucking closed. And the people around him were so loyal because he was a genuinely really cool person. And like all this shit, like I think after the stroke, in all reality, I think it changed everything. Because the man I met in the 90s had a real captivating personality, kind of had a childlike, like he'd look at things and be like, wow, this is so cool. Like he was just really present and genuine. And I could see how anyone would fall in love with the dude. He was just a really brilliant, cool guy. He listened to you. It was great. And like he had just such an amazing vibe. And I think after the stroke, and then when they got the Girls Next Door and all that, everything around him became central casting, and those people weren't really his friends. And all the shit they're talking now, it's like, you know, don't you have any personal responsibility in not putting yourself in a place where you don't think is a good place to be? But they all wanted to seek the fame and the funny and the money, and fuck all that. And
it's easy to not take blame. You know, I'm not trying to point fingers, but it's very simplified to just say, well, it's not my fault. Right. As far as Ben Dronker's importance in the cannabis scene, could you touch on that? Because like we don't hear enough in America about some of the OGs over there, and he's obviously
one of them.
And he's Hank, still to this day, you can smoke cannabis and also have a beer if you want.
No, in 1996, maybe it was that year. The Dutch law changed, and you couldn't serve alcohol and cannabis, and you had to pick. And so guys like Arian had to give up the alcohol and go with soft drinks and cannabis if he wanted to keep his Tollstraat location open, for instance. And because that was traditionally a neighborhood bar. Tollstraat, the first greenhouse coffee shop was on Tollstraat. I loved the place. I spent many, many nights there. And but it served alcohol when I first was there, and then had to stop. But Ben started his in Rotterdam. He had the Sensi Smile and the Sensi Smile Cafe, I would say early 80s. And, you know, there'd already been people in the game like Hank DeVries. Hank and Ben are very good friends. Hank DeVries is talk about the OG of OGs. I mean, Bernard Brunning started the Mellow Yellow in 1974, and Hank started Bulldog in 74. But Hank had a real acumen for business. He has hotels and restaurants, and he has everything. I mean, he has liquor licenses at places where, like the Bulldog Lead Supply in the middle of Amsterdam, the top floor has alcohol, the bottom floor has cannabis, and it's a former police department. Okay. Technically two businesses, but you can go up and downstairs, or you could sit outside.
You don't even put it together though. Okay, I totally get it.
Dude, you want to hear amazing numbers, dude? That place has been doing over 2,000 customers a day for like since the early 80s. That guy does 100,000 euro days out of that one location. He is,
and there's like six or seven.
No,
I mean, maybe more. Yeah.
Hank,
but you go around Amsterdam.
Hank is so wealthy, it's insane. Oh, dude, bike rentals, bars, hotels. We were at dinner one night, and I said, Hank, why everything? Why do you got to own everything? He said, Todd, you know, if they come over and they just buy some grass at my coffee shop, I maybe get 10 cents of their dollar. Yeah. If they come over and they stay at my hotel and they eat at my restaurant, they drink at my bar, and they buy some grass at my coffee shop, I might get 80, 90 cents each dollar. And I was like, this is why you're Hank.
Smart business, man.
Oh, he is on.
Why don't we have lounges in California, or at least the US? Like you see them starting to pop up, but it's not opened up. It's like one here, one there. They paid $3 million for a license. Here's a bunch of people that own licenses but won't operate them. They're hoping to either sell them or partner. It's like, it's not an industry on its own out here.
The alcohol industry has got a heavy foot on the throat of our politicians. There's no question. And if you look at the research from now legal states, tobacco and alcohol use is going down. And I don't know if you know this, because I didn't when I discovered it, but back in Amsterdam, CNN International had a marijuana quiz one day, and it said, who produced the film Reefer Madness? And you had three answers. Was it church group, the government, or a group of liquor distillers. And I thought, oh, maybe a church group? Nope, wrong. And I was like, okay, well, maybe the government, right? Because it couldn't be that obvious.
Yeah.
Wrong. It was a group of liquor distillers, because if you go back into the Prohibition era days, there was more hashish coffee shops, if you would call them, speakeasies, whatever, in New York than there was alcohol speakeasies. Because with the World Fair in the late 19th century, what came with it was hashish candies. And there were literally advertisements, make the fair better, eat some hash candy at the beginning. And hashish and cannabis were coming along with jazz, because also you had the, desegregation happening, and you had jazz musicians who brought cannabis off the farms, because cotton had only been for like 100 years. Cannabis went back to 1600s. So when you think about the true history of it, the jazz musicians had a connection to cannabis first, because think of how comforting it must have been to be a fucking slave and have cannabis. Like, it's the only thing you could be thankful for back then. And then they switched out to cotton, but they were still growing hemp up until, realistically, even when you look at Hemp for Victory, which was a 1942 film made by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is really something we should take a second to mention, because Jack Herer gave that film to a Wall Street Journal reporter in the early 90s. And it was black and white, 14 minutes. Jack felt it was authentic, but didn't have documentation. He just had the film. He didn't really think about it. Wall Street Journal reporter takes it back and calls the Library of Congress and says, I need a citation for this. And they said, we don't have one. We didn't make that. That's fake. So he calls Jack Herer up and says, Jack, you're full of shit. This is not made by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is a forgery. You're trying to trick me. Jack says, fuck you. I would never lie. Goes out to the East Coast, goes to the Library of Congress, and goes inside, goes through all the microfiche, can't find it. Goes outside, getting high, and thinks, one of the girls there brought up, what would we be looking at if we were here in 1942? It wouldn't be microfiche. It would be books. So they march back inside, go up to the librarian and say, hey, if we were here in 1942, you wouldn't have microfiche. What would you give us? She said, oh, we'd have these books. We still have them there by the copies you were using. So Jack goes back, finds 2 citations to Hemp for Victory, 14 minutes, black and white, U.S. Department of Agriculture, photocopies it, has to then give it to the librarian to actually put it back into the fucking documents of our own history, because somehow when these assholes were fucking putting everything in the Library of Congress, they didn't put in Hemp for Victory, 14 minutes, U.S. Department of Agriculture, because they just wanted to omit it from our fucking history. So Jack had to then put it back in, and then he got to bring it to the Wall Street Journal reporter and say, I wasn't lying. They were hiding the truth, which really exemplifies everything I'm saying in The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And he got put on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Jack's little picture is on the Wall Street Journal's front page, and a very accompanying article validating his book. And this is how deep it was buried. And realistically, man, I mean...
But it goes back to the liquor lobby.
It goes back, in my opinion, yes, because when you think of post-alcohol prohibition, they got so rich, and they made the film Reefer Madness because they knew who their competition was. And even now, they're the ones fighting against legalization because it's taking money out of their pockets. No question.
Todd, talk about opening Woodstock. I don't think, obviously there's tons of people that saw it, but you opened Woodstock.
Yeah, I did. So in the 90s, Zach De La Rocha of Rage Against the Machine had an idea to mix musicians and actors and famous people with activists. And he had this idea to call it Spitfire. And I got contacted by this woman, Susan, and she wanted Woody and me, and she wanted a lot of other people too. And we ended up doing it. And I toured around to colleges and with Chris Novoselic of Nirvana, Amy Ray, the Indigo Girls. Chris would talk about free speech. Amy Ray would talk about gay and lesbian rights. Jello Biafra joined us. He talked about fucking everything and just blew our minds. Woody went on the road, talked about the environment. Michael Franti talked about civil rights and
Spearhead.
Yeah, we're best friends to this day. I'm glad you like Michael, man.
Oh, man. For music, all the heady music you see on First Smoke of the Day on the Instagram and stuff, like I dig how something makes me feel, like an interview or something you're saying, or like if I can apply music, I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of cannabis and just, I'd say creators. That's probably the best way. Artists, creators, whatever you want to call it. It blows my
mind how many people, like, especially when you get into it, how many people had a connection to cannabis. Like, the most creative people you would never expected, in my opinion, were total stoners. I asked Bill Maher one day, I said, what would you attribute cannabis for doing in your life? And he says, other than giving me every great idea I've ever had, nothing.
That's like that book where you flip it. There's other, but tell me about opening Woodstock.
Well,
because you opened not the original Woodstock when they redid
99.
it. Yeah, 99. What a lineup.
Well, I was, we did Spitfire there. And on the first day, I did it with Andy Dick and Kennedy from MTV, because Kennedy had, she was more Republican, but she talked stuff. We loved her anyway. You know, people can be conservative. It's cool. Yeah, man, I got to walk out 11:35 on the West stage and say, welcome to Woodstock. And I was supposed to go first, but I got a little like, whoa. I smoked out before I went out there, and then I walked right to the end of the stage because I was like, this isn't going to bother me. And there's a lot of people. And then I looked to my left, and there was my head on a Jumbotron. So I looked away, and there was my head on another Jumbotron. I was like, okay, I'm feeling a little self-conscious. And then I turned to Andy because I said Andy's name, and they were like, yeah. And I was like, Andy, you got to go first. And he was like, no, you go first. And I was like, you're the professional, and I'm freaked out. And because he was not that far from me, and he was like, okay. So he went on, and he ended up saying a bunch of shit that I didn't like. And I don't script
That's
myself.
What happens, yeah.
I don't write my speeches. I know it sounds crazy, like you're gonna walk out on stage in front of Woodstock for 20 minutes without a speech. And
Holy shit!
Yeah, I do.
That long?
I got 20 minutes. Oh, it got worse. It got worse. You want to know why it got worse? Because Andy ends up going up there. He got a DUI, and they found some coke on him. And he's like, you know, be responsible. Don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. And I got up there, and I was like, listen. I was like, for those of us who want to do drugs responsible, we should have a right to do them.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just alcohol and cigarettes, man. It's psychedelics and LSD and all our good shit. Like, I like weed. And Andy, funny enough, he listened to me, and Andy was like, we came off the stage later. He's like, I like everything you said. He's like, fuck this. I'm never going to say this shit again. And it was so funny. And well, I did my 20 minutes. So he did his 20 minutes. I did my 20 minutes. And then Kennedy came out, and because she was doing some MTV shit, and she wasn't there for the first 40 minutes. So she came out.
Who started the DARE program, right?
No, that was, I debated that asshole too. He was right here in LA. He was an LAPD
We'll
chief.
stay on that topic. Sorry.
So Kennedy came out, and that was a night. Kennedy came out, and as soon as she grabs the mic, they started shouting, show your tits, show your tits. And she was like, I will not show you my boobies. And Andy, who I didn't even make it to where he was, the stage was so big. Andy's going, get the mic. And I'm like, what the fuck do you mean get the mic? And I turn, and she was having a little meltdown. And I looked at her, and I'd already known her well enough that we had done enough dates. I was like, you want me to get the mic? And she went like this with the mic, and they started cheering. And I walked over and got the mic, and they started yelling like, yay. And I was like, be nice. It's not that easy up here, okay? And I was like, who wants? And my manager, Sarah's yelling at me going, you got 20 minutes. Don't leave. We can't have a dead stage. Go back out. And I was like,
Todd, show your tits.
I was like, so I just walked out there, and I was like, hey, everybody be cool. I was like, who wants 20 more minutes of me? And they all they cheered. So I just made shit up for another 20 minutes. 40 minutes on Friday.
Bro.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
How many people you think were there?
A fucking lot. Dude,
Yeah.
there was...
You've seen aerials, and it's like...
You couldn't see the other stage. It was on a landing strip, so there was the west stage and the east stage, and from the west stage, you could not see the east stage. It was a mile away. It was insane.
Yeah.
And I made jokes. I made a joke that, you know, with Budweiser sponsoring Woodstock, we'll see how much peace and love they got after 3 days of hangovers. And they ended up burning the place down. I left early on Sunday because it was fucking weird. The energy changed. I didn't like it. And I was really lucky. I had an artist pass. There was that little fucking, they drove me around. I got to eat in the back. I mean, I was like, when are they going to figure out I'm not a celebrity? But
you're walking around smoking, obviously.
Me? No, I kept it. No, to a degree. Chill. I mean, I did smoke a lot when I was there, but because I had full backstage access, and I had like really good time. Like I know Dave Matthews, and Dave's a smoker. So I had a South African joint, and I saved it for 2 weeks knowing I would see him. And I wanted to smoke with him because he's from South Africa. And I was just like, and we after his set, we went and sat on the grass and smoked together. And it was one of my best favorite parts of Woodstock, honestly, was sitting on the grass alone with my friend Dave. And it was insane. I had such a good time. But she got booed off stage, so I made up the next. And then on Saturday, I did it with Rosie Perez and Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead. And that went as planned.
Rosie's, I mean, she's like commanding attention, her voice. I mean, everything about her.
They shouted, "Show your tits." She said, "Go see my movies."
They did that to her too?
Yeah, she said, "Fuck you, go see my movies." Oh my God. She's awesome, dude.
They're ruthless, man.
It was Woodstock.
It's like having the internet out there pre-internet, holy shit.
It was crazy, but it was interesting. I mean, Friday and Saturday night I had a good time. Sunday was a little weird. I stayed at the Indian reservation. They put me up in a suite. They flew me first class. The whole thing was like I can't believe this is happening to me experience. And even right up to the beginning, I was the first person to get in the green room, and it was a trailer and smoke out. And my manager's assistant comes and opens the door and looked horrified. She was like, "You're going on stage in 5 minutes." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm getting ready." She was like,
this is called pregame.
This is
pregame.
I don't know another way to do it. Leave me alone.
This is the appetizer to what we're about to do.
Yeah, man, I still couldn't believe they let me go out there, and it was, dude, the press tent held 3,500 people with tables like this and internet connections, and it's
bigger than most concerts. You know what I'm saying? Like the average concert isn't that.
And it was nice because when me and Andy went and did the press, Andy completely changed what he was saying. He was just like, medical marijuana should be legal. Andy was cool. So he
turned one speech to the other, turned 180 degrees. That's hilarious.
We weren't on we were getting driven over the press tent. Yeah. He was already fucked there.
Yeah. He's like, give me a hit of that. Can you speak on Ken Morrow a little bit? You're friends with Trichome Technologies, Ken Morrow.
Yeah. Kenny's one of my best friends.
I hear so many good things about his chapter in cannabis and like his legacy of what he provided and sacrificed.
Kenny's great.
Yeah.
I've known Kenny since the 90s. And fortunately, when I got out of prison, I moved up to the Bay. He lives in the Bay, and we got to do a lot of cool things together. I consider him one of my best friends. Mm-hmm. He started Trichome Technologies way back when we were still criminals. And he released things like Ultraviolet, which was with the first purple, before Purple Urkel and Granddaddy Purple and the whole purple. He had Ultraviolet. And Kenny is a very innovative, technically thinking person. He's gone into patents and separations. Like, for instance, he's the one who contacted Across International and told them, the oven manufacturers, and say, hey, you're missing your market. There's something called hydrocarbon extractions, and your oven is an essential part of it. So he comes over to my house one day, and he has all these samples of BHO, and I took the first photos of the first BHO that became the first ad for Across International in High Times way back in 11 or 12.
He's like, here's a $500 million idea or market for you. Like, I'm trying to navigate in my head how big that is. And I'm like, yeah, probably about $500 million, $500 million market. That it's like saying to Food Saver, people use this for weed, and they're like, what? And it's like, yeah, probably 90% of what you sell.
Yeah. So Kenny's it's a trip. Kenny has gone after patents and gotten patents on like ultraviolet light and cleaning plants way back 20 years ago. Also into terpene extraction and separation. Kenny's one of my favorite persons to have a conversation with, because he's like, he dreams like not like a child in a negative way, but a child in a way that he doesn't know what's not possible. And he's like, what if we did this and this and this? And it's like, it blows my mind. And like, I got a lot of love for Kenny. I think that he's also been writing a column called Tomorrow in Cannabis, as a play on his last name, Morrow, for Cannabis Business Times for many years. The articles are all online. They're phenomenally well written. The subjects are deep. I would recommend them to anybody who's a student of cannabis. Kenny's been, in my opinion, at the forefront of the technology for quite a long time. He had some of the first really killer photos of like California indoor, like in High Times back in the day, and Red Eye. He's the one who introduced me to Nick, that Red Eye Press out in the UK. But Kenny's also kind of shy, and
for sure,
he's really not one that's tooting his own horn, or he's an absolute gentleman. I mean, I've had the good fortune of him liking me. That's kind of how I feel about through life. Like,
the OGs are all like that. You're like, God, I hope they just like me so we can be normal and have a normal convo. Because if they hate you, you're like, fuck.
Well, this is,
and they're particular. I can tell you and Ken are the only two that sent me reading material to do my research before we had our first conversation. And there's a certain type of person that I say leads a rich life, has a lot of experiences, but I had to do research or homework, I call it, before I even had a conversation with Ken on like text message.
Oh, 100%.
It was like, Kenny's, hey man, here's some stuff you should read, and then we'll talk in a day or two. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, 100%. That is totally Kenny. You know, Kenny's done his homework, and Kenny's not, you know, and this is one of the things I've always admired about him, because there's a lot of people now seem to want to be spoon fed, and it breaks my heart. I get calls from people want me to read them the website, and I'm like, come on, man, just hit more. And, you know, where did you get Skunk One? It says it right there.
Yeah.
You know,
right under where it says, this is how I got Skunk One. Yeah, just read.
And, you know, and it is what it is. I mean, I think a lot of kids in today's generation grew up with remote controls and they expect everything to show up. And I'm fortunate that my grandmother was born in 1911. She taught me how to work hard. She taught me to go shovel the snow before school. She taught me how to grow vegetables and tomatoes in the backyard. Little did she know what that would lead to. And, this is an interesting little anecdote, but the way I got into growing was I traded a $20 bag of weed for my friend's Mel Frank grow book in January of 1982. He was 19 years old. That seemed really old to me at the time. I was 13. And I had just turned 13 in October.
That's wild.
And it was January of 84. And he had his own apartment, and he was like a laborer doing a lot of lumber work. And when we walked into his living room, he had this white cabinet that was closed. And when he opened the door, I saw my first cannabis plants in my whole life. And he had just like the picture in Mel Frank's book, he had like a little table, and he had fluorescent lights on strings with pulleys, and he was growing marijuana. And I was just like, dude, it was like the color scene in The Wizard of Oz, going from black and white to color. My life was never the same again. And I was just like, holy shit. And he wanted it, and he didn't even tell me till I got there. He wanted to front the bag of weed. And I was like, fuck you, Fred. And trade me the book. And he was like, no, man, I need the book. I was like, you got a car and the mall's up the street.
The chicken or the egg,
I need the book.
Yeah.
You go pay yourself for the bag of weed and go buy the book and keep the $7 because I need this thing. And he was like, he came off the book because he knew. And man,
you ain't gonna grow no weed. Smoke this.
Not in the time you need the weed.
I'm gonna sell you 100 bags of weed. Yeah.
So I took it home and I cleaned out my closet, and I went down to the basement and I found my grandmother's fluorescent lights, and I snatched them, and I found the ropes and pulleys from when she had laundry lines before we had a dryer, snatched them. I found her pots, her soil, and her watering can, grabbed it. And then on the way upstairs from the basement, I grabbed her timer from the front window because you needed that too. And I used to have to goddamn go downstairs every night, turn on the light at sunset, and turn it off when she went to bed, because that shit was on a timer and I couldn't really I couldn't find one. It wasn't I was just a little kid. So I was like, so I was growing for a year, and she came upstairs, and my lights would cycle 8 to 8. So it'd go off at 8 a.m. and come on at 8 p.m. And she came up like 7:59 and 55 seconds. And she comes up, mind you, it's 1984, the end of 84 at this point. E.T., the extraterrestrial, is selling M&Ms out of a glowing closet. And she comes upstairs, and my room's, I had one window and it had tin on it, and mini blinds were closed. So it was dark, and my closet was glowing. And she comes in my room and screams and touches me. And I'm like, what? And as soon as she touches me, the timer clicks off. And she loses her shit. Yeah. Someone's in your closet. And I was like, no one's in my closet, Grandma. And she's like, they just turned off the light. And I was like, no, they didn't, Grandma. And she's like pushing me. She's 4'11". She pushed me to the closet. I open the door. I click. As soon as that click sounds, she said, that's my timer. And then she looks up and the lights go zzz, 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 zzz. And she goes, those are my fluorescent lights. She looks down. She goes, that's my watering can. Those are my pots. And I was like, yeah, the only thing I had to get was fertilizer. And now I've been dying to tell you why all your houseplants are dying. It's because you got to pH the water and give them more food. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And the plants were like, because I just keep raising the lights. So they were like 6 foot tall and they were blooming. And my grandmother was like, they were beautiful. Like, you'd be amazed how well you can grow plants under fluorescent lights. And she was like, do you take these outside? And I said, no. And she goes, what are you going to do to it? And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, what are you going to spray on it? I said, nothing. And she goes, well, what are you going to add to it? I said, nothing. And I used to dry my plants in my drawer. And I opened up and I pulled out a bud and I was like, this is it, Grandma. Yeah. And she was like, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, I'm just going to put it in the pipe and smoke it. And she goes, Todd, if it was that natural, it wouldn't be illegal. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. And so we made a deal. She wouldn't fuck with my plants, and I went to school. And then I came back after school thinking I'm screwed. And I was like, what do you think? And she was like, I think they'd be better off in the basement. And I was like, what?
You're like, me too. Sit, couple trays, few lights.
You're gonna love this, dude. My grandma's idea was
get a helper.
She said, put down a pallet so they're not on the concrete, and you can use some of my old drapes, which were white on one side and fabric on the other, and hanging around them. Jeez. And then I hung up a fan from the rafters because it was unfinished, and I had a fan at the bottom and a fan on top. And my grandmother took over watering because clearly I was a child, and she would deal with the washer and dryer. And the funniest first dispute I had as a grower. So 1 a.m, I'm stoned, go down. Everything looks great. I cut the plants down, bring them upstairs, hang them upside down. They were like 3 feet tall. I was thrilled. Grandma in the morning, I wake up, I go downstairs. She's mad. I said, what's the matter? She goes, what did you do to the plants? I said, I harvested them. They're upstairs drying. She goes, you didn't have to cut them all down. You're greedy. Those were beautiful plants. You could have just taken a few flowers. And I was like, but that's what we do, Grandma. And she was like, well, what do you do now? I said, we plant new seeds. And she was like, and start over? And I was like, yeah. Forever. And she was like, I'm going to plant my own seeds and you're not going to touch them. And I was like, oh my God. Right. I was like, couldn't believe it, dude. It was really funny.
That is pretty funny. I mean, it just shows, Todd, that cannabis has been something in your life, a passion, and honestly, like a career.
Dude, she taught me how to clean.
Forever.
Grandma taught me how to take a cutting.
I mean, your mom was cool with it too.
Oh, very.
So it just shows you too, like what a progressive family. Like this is in
Rhode Island. I
mean, which is even crazier to think you're in the Northeast and this is happening.
Oh no, dude, it's saturated with weed.
It is, right?
Hugely. Yeah, hugely.
If you could talk a little bit about the seeds that you have available on your website or that you do drops of, because so much everyone wants to go to, he can't have that. No one has those seeds. That can't be the real stuff. That's not. Now that I'm smoking it, now that we've talked, now that we've learned a lot about the history and how your history weaves in with so many of these other people whose genetics are available. Can you talk a little bit about like what you're doing?
Sure. I mean, for me, I was collecting genetics before I was selling seeds. I mean, it's been a passion of mine for a long time. And Haze, when the hemp farm bill passed, I saw an opportunity to extend my activism because, 25 years ago, I could plant the seed of knowledge in your mind, but now I can put the seeds of cannabis in your hand and you can go home and experience what I've been experiencing for a very long time. And it's really nice and it's empowering. And, there's not enough haze in the world. And I know this sounds funny, but we've moved down towards these short, fast flowering varieties that, and I put it like this. If you had a box of 16 Crayola crayons, the modern cannabis industry is playing with the first 9. And there's crayons 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 in the box, which I have, which are represented in things like the Congolese from Mel Frank or the original Haze from Skunkman Sam that he preserved. And there'll be a lot more as well.
Northern Lights, hopefully.
Well, we have Purest Indica, Northern Lights 2 and Northern Lights 5. So what I did, fortunately, I'm friends with Skunkman Sam and Mel Frank, and fortunately, they like me. So they liked me for a long time. So when I started doing this, Mel Frank has been a writer for a long time, and I sent him my little PDF of what I was going to send around to my friends. I started selling seeds to my friends. That's how now I have like 14,000 customers. I've processed over 19,000 orders. I have growers in all 50 states and about 23 countries. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Growing like what we would consider, 20-year-old, 30-year-old genetics.
Even older with Haze. Haze goes back to 69. It's the same combination preserved by Sam and then me. That was all the way through. And, for me, it's about preservation. And I wrote an article, it's on the High Time site. It's called The Primary Colors of Cannabis. Because when you stop and think about primary colors, there's only 3, red, yellow, blue. When you think about music, I'm into music. There's only 12 notes in music. So everything from, Bach and Beethoven to country to Willie Nelson to rap, it's the same 12 notes. And when you go back to the mid 80s, all of this modern cannabis comes from the Skunk 1, original Haze, California Orange, Early Pearl, Early Girl, Afghani 1, Hindu Kush, Durban Poison. These were the varieties that were what caused all of these modern hybrids to come about. there's been some exceptions where we've had, you know, cannabis brought in by THI or Acapulco Gold or things like that. But in all reality, and that's why I pointed out the Cannabible to you, because it expresses from country of origin to varietal name. And Rob Clark did a wonderful job. He did that in the mid 90s. And he was one of the contributors to that magazine I sent you that I was editor-in-chief of. That's why I became such good friends with Rob, because he was teaching me and letting me feature his work. And it's phenomenal. His work is amazing. And it was before the book Hashish came out, and I didn't know shit about what sizes, how many microns is a trichrome. You know, not, wait a minute, just the tip? Yeah. Turns out it's between 60 and 150 microns, if you're just wondering.
Yeah.
So I went out and got screens because that's what he taught me to do. So I went and got W.S. Tyler screens. I would get 150s for the top and put my cannabis on, and then I get 60s in the middle. And I'd sometimes get all the way 60 to 150s, because that way I could have different size trichromes. And time to feed the dog. Sorry. And I could have different size trichromes. I even have this thing called a Rotap, which it shakes the particle separation screens. It's kind of loud and obnoxious, but does a good job. And what happens is, it's like if you go apple picking, you know, like the 3-inch apples would be perfect. The 2-inch ones you'll throw at each other, and the 4-inch ones are just mush with worms in it. So trichromes are somewhat similar, because when I started shaking my harvests and just like harvesting trichromes, you'd see it'd be like 70 or 80 or 90. It'd depend on what size they fell down on, and they would be different consistencies. So let's say the 90 micron ones were easy to smush, you know, and the 70s were harder. And it was really fascinating. So one of the things that I, in the 90s, bumped into was I had a Marinol bottle, and I was stoned, and I just used an AB epoxy in the house that day. And I was stopped, and I thought, wow, man, synthetic cannabinoids suspended in sesame oil. What if Mother Nature gave me the 2-pi epoxy on the plant? So what about an organic cannabinoid molecule? Because I had all this resin powder sitting around from my screens and some hemp seed oil. So I went and I scooped up some resin powder, and I poured some hemp seed oil in the frying pan, and I poured it in, and I melted it, because oil, resin gland is just waxy cuticle layer. So it all disintegrated, and I put it on some muffins, and I proceeded to sleep for 2 days. And I went, okay, that was a little too strong. And then I started fucking around and using mason jars. And what I would do is the resin powder, or the, you know, trichrome heads in the mason jar, put the hemp seed oil in, swish it around, put it in the refrigerator. After about 10 days to 14 days, the hemp seed oil breaks down the waxy cuticle layer of the trichrome. And then what I would do is take like a coffee filter, but not like a paper one, but like a stainless steel one. And I would pour it through to collect the non-glandular trichrome, the stalks.
Yes.
Because they're a denser, waxy cuticle layer.
Most people don't want that no matter what.
I don't want it either, because the trichromes, they got all the good shit. They got the cannabinoids and terpenes. But once that breaks down, now it's in the hemp seed oil. I call it phyto-cannabinoid enriched hemp seed oil, because now you've captured all of the cannabinoids and terpenes without decarboxylating them in a cold environment, your refrigerator. And now you can start taking that as a medicine, because you can get higher concentrations of the cannabinoids in it, because it's not decarboxylated, and you won't get whacked out high. I love getting high. Don't get me wrong. But there's a time and a place where you want the medicine to work, and not necessarily the psychedelic effect. So if you have a kid who's having seizures, or you got to go to work, it'd be nice to be able to use the medicine, have a great day, and then come home, smoke a joint, and relax. So hemp seed oil could be a whole show in itself, because Dr. Roberta Hamilton, who is a UCLA teacher, and she's a contributor to The Emperor Wears No Clothes, she heard me speaking about having cancer in 1994 and pulled me aside and said, listen, you got to learn about essential fatty acids and how to balance them. I was like, talking about. And as she started talking to me, I realized I knew more about fertilizing plants than I did about feeding humans, because I knew nothing about what's a complex digestible protein. How do they rate proteins? Edison value by digestibility. Does it have trypsin inhibitors like soy and make it non-digestible? Do you have a balance of inflammatory essential fatty acids like W6 or anti-inflammatory EFAs like W3, which are not found in most common seed oils? Jeez. And she started blowing my fucking mind. And there was a movie called Lorenzo's Oil, made in 1992 at Nick Nolte and Susan Sarandon. It's about a family that has a kid and he's not responding to Western medicine. So they start mixing together something and they make Lorenzo's Oil. Well, it's real. Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. But if you look it up, he was mixing together olive oil and rapeseed oil, because what it did is it brought it up to like a 4-to-1 ratio of W6 to W3. Science now sees it as a 3-to-1 ratio, ideal for human consumption. This shit clicked with me because when I was a little kid on that dirt bike, I had a 2-stroke. I had to put oil in with my gas. And if I didn't, I'd seize up my engine and the fun would stop. And when she said this to me, I was like, you're blowing my mind. And at the time, when she was talking about what is a complex digestible protein, well, it has to have all of these vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids. Hemp does. So she had gone to Africa and met children that didn't have earlobes and came back and was doing research to try to find a good protein source from a plant and not an animal, because animals don't make proteins. Cows don't make protein, they store it. Fish don't make essential fatty acids, they eat it and they store it. And when you have like farm grown salmon and you don't give them a proper diet, they don't have EFAs, for instance, because our bodies don't create these things. They use them from the plants we eat. Which blew my mind. She turned me into a vegetarian accidentally because I started looking at food scientifically instead of just like, oh, that's a nice muffin.
Like go to the source instead of down the line.
Oh, blew my mind.
Very interesting.
And when she started teaching me this stuff, that I need a balance of EFAs and such, and then Jack handed me the book, Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, because it has a chapter called Nature's Most Perfectly Balanced Oil. And he does a whole thing on hemp seed oil. And he references our book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. So Jack would have me read all these fucking books. So Peter's book and Dr. Udo's book I read, and that book blew my mind because I read the Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill book after meeting Dr. Roberta Hamilton. She laid all this shit on me that went right over my fucking head. But then I read the book and I was like, this is everything she was saying. Because it turned out she was the one that sent the fatty acid profile to Dr. Udo in Canada. She got some hippie, basically, did a fatty acid profile and a protein profile of hemp seed. Couldn't read it because it's crazy. Sends it to her. She said, Todd, I thought someone was playing a joke on me because it had more digestible protein than soybeans.
So saying that the hemp seed oil, which comes from the hemp seed, had exactly what they've been looking for.
It was a perfectly balanced EFA oil.
More than what's out there now or available. Now?
When you say more than, the only way you can get it is if you mix together the oils. So it's the only known perfectly balanced EFA source on the planet, which is on another level. And then the seed itself, when you take into consideration the fibrous hull and the meat inside, which is a little germplasm, and it's just wrapped in hemp seed oil, that is nature's most perfectly balanced protein, most digestive thing that we can have. It's really quite remarkable. If you were to ask me what's the most medicinal part of cannabis, I'd have to say the seed even more than the cannabinoid. Because if you can treat the disease before you have the disease with proper nutrition, you might not need the medicine.
I mean, if you think about what that is, it's the life cycle of the plant. That's the essence. I mean, that seed is the new life. I mean, it makes sense that would have the most amount of benefit. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's mind blowing.
Very interesting, Todd. Very interesting.
Really, for your own health, you should be consuming a tablespoon per 50 pounds of body weight per day
of hemp seed oil
or any balanced oil. Dr. Udo came out with his own, but you were kind of mocking the new cannabis industry. He represents that. If you go back and buy a Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill book back in 1994, 95, there's a paragraph where he says that he used flaxseed oil exclusively, and it took about a year to develop paper-thin skin that dried out easily and cracked. So he set out to make his own balanced oil blend, but other matters intervened, and before too long, the fatty acid composition arrived in the mail. And he writes, there was my perfectly balanced oil. Mother Nature had beat me to it by a few 100 million years. Well, fast forward to 1996, 97, his oil comes out. That paragraph is now one sentence, just saying that having the EFA deficiency, I set out to make my own oil. Full stop. Take away that rest about Mother Nature beating me to market. They don't need to know that. And if you get,
because there's profit involved,
because now he has his own oil and now he's competing with hemp seed oil. So he left the chapter in there, but he took out the part about Mother Nature beating him to the market by a few 100 million years.
Because it negates, why would you need him then? Yeah, or
100%. And I still don't use his product because in all reality, it's refined, it's mixed together. It's not that it sucks. It's
but just that
palatable.
You would omit part of the truth.
It's exactly
that's the part
that's
that
what
sucks.
we've been experiencing. That's the Library of Congress. That's Dr. Udo. That's our modern cannabis industry.
Yes.
Pretending like they invented cannabis, and it's bullshit.
Well, and us being suppressed over a lot of bullshit. I mean, I want to get into a few. Let's continue with what I originally asked, because then I have one or two more questions I want to get into that are like my banger questions. But you're preserving genetics currently, and you're also are you breeding right now or no?
Always.
So how do people can access your products though? And like, we're smoking genetics that more growers that I'm around day to day would absolutely love. I just think they're skeptical about old school stuff, or is this real, or what is this? And it's like, now that I've been in front of you, I've been able to smoke this. It's like, oh man, I can only imagine the varieties that some of these growers would now have access to, or will trust to have access to. I guess a better way to put it. This
is why I call it the primary colors of cannabis, because fortunately we're able to go back and get original haze directly from Skunkman Sam. So I know the source, because pedigree is important. The skunk one that I got from Mel Frank was from Skunkman Sam, but it was sitting in Mel Frank's fridge all this time. And he did the one reproduction in 96, which is pretty amazing. So those seeds haven't even had a chance to get influenced by modern cannabis, because they were sitting in his fridge from 96 till 2019, and till I did the seed reproduction in 2020.
The time capsule. Yeah,
exactly. The original haze, same thing. And then Greg comes along with the purest indica, the NL2 and the NL5, which can blow your socks off, and they're very different. And I get the most compliments from older heads that actually have experience with the older cannabis, and they're like, man, this just takes me back. Because it really does. I mean, I have given joints of haze to people, and they're like, Tim Blake, for instance, when he first smelled the haze shatter, he was like, I haven't smelled this since the 70s. And he probably has not, because that is really unique. And even in what we call Jack now, it's really the haze signature. And technically, it's even hazier than Jack, because Jack is a complex polyhybrid of both Northern Lights haze and skunk. So most everything out, even this one that I gave you is of my work, but original haze is blow your socks off, in my opinion, hazy. And so what I have is, when I started releasing this stuff, I called them IBLs for inbred lines, because I wanted to be clear with people that I was not mixing them with something different. Like, I feel when people come out now and I see these Dutch or European seed companies saying, I got Northern Lights 5, it's like fucking bullshit. You know, if they're regular seeds and you didn't breed them with something, how'd you make them? Yeah, because you didn't have them in the first place. The questions
just start, and that's why people are so skeptical these days to spend money on stuff that they're like, is a time capsule.
It really,
because it's so rare to be actually like, does this person have them? They do. Holy shit! And are they available? And then you start to go down like, how viable are they today?
Oh wait a minute! No. The seeds are fresh.
Yes, but I mean, even the genetics, are they viable? Meaning today's market is what I meant.
Mixed. So original haze, I mean, Skunkman Sam always used to say it's best to breed with. It's best to go through it and pick the one you like, and then breed it to something you have that you like, because it'll make it 10 times better.
Love that.
And I get that, because, look, flower time is important, but at the same time, man, I was growing for 10 years before I got to Amsterdam, and I was at Positronics visiting for the first time before I ever worked there or knew Bernard. And I saw a square meter with 50 little plants in it, about a foot tall. And I thought to myself, it was a perfectly flat canopy. They all looked like little soldiers. And I was just like, wow, that's how you're supposed to do it. Like, literally, I felt like such an amateur. And the gentleman I asked, his name ended up being Peter. He called himself the Bush Doctor. He taught people how to grow at Positronics. Super nice guy. Ended up being a good friend. I said to him, how much are you trying to get off each plant? And he said, 10 grams. I said, wow, it must be pretty easy to harvest 10 grams from the plant. It goes, very easy. And you don't have to give it much pre-grow. And I was just like, wow, he's this. But if you have 50 of them, you get 500 grams per meter. And I was like, well, very consistently, very perfectly, 50 little buds. And I was just like, this guy's blowing my mind. And this is how the Dutch coffee shops, emulating the tulip market, just pump them out. And it really is absolutely the best. And me being an American, and my American friends, we were afraid to have so many plants. I mean, look what they did to me. For having over 4,000. I was facing a 10-year mandatory minimum at the time.
And did 5. That's a run, man. That's a long time.
And it was because I pled out. And when I pled out with, because they offered me two things. go to trial. You're going to lose because they wouldn't let me. They had this book with redactions everywhere. So how to grow marijuana redacted. How to grow marijuana. Everything was redacted. They didn't want the jury to be able to see anything that's related to medical marijuana. They wouldn't let me bring my doctors in. They barred me a medical necessity defense. They cheated the whole fucking way through. And they were shits. And it really sucked. But so going to trial was pointless. I wanted to go to appeal because the Ninth Circuit, I thought I might have a chance of winning. And they said 2 deals. If you don't want to go to trial and go to 10 years, because they don't give you bond on a 10-year sentence. It's immediate prison, even though I'd been out on bond for almost 3 years.
Because you'll run?
Well, no, dude.
Is that their assumption that?
No, it's because it's written into the mandatory minimum laws that were fucking horrible and hated us. So, no, it's funny because when Woody posted the $500,000, there was one day in 99 that I went to go see him, and we're standing on this black sand beach in Maui, and that my PO, my pretrial service officer, had given me permission like the day before to go get on the plane the next day because it was last minute. And I was like, man, I can't believe they gave me permission to come on a day's notice. He looked at me and goes, Todd, they just wish you won't come back.
Yeah, keep that money.
And well, not just the money, but you're just a thorn in their side. Oh. Won't shut up. And I was like, wow, you're right. And it was a trip because but I'd never run away. Fuck that. I'd never ever back down. I mean, you go through cancer 10 times. You either learn how to fight or you die.
Yeah, you have to. It's flee or fight. Yeah.
Yeah, fight or flight, but you don't get flight when you're facing death. You got to deal with life. And, it's interesting because even my friend Aaron, who bailed me out of jail with DJ Pooh in 06, said to me, he goes, you've lived a really crazy life because most people won't go debate the DEA and then see if they're bluffing and fly out to Holland, pick up your medicine. And then I smoked on the way back.
And call their bluff again.
And I flew back. I didn't get arrested. I flew into Denver and I declared my cannabis. I actually went up and said, excuse me, do you have a form where I can declare my medical prescription?
Holy hell.
She's like, what are you declaring? I said, my prescription's cannabis. She looked at me, she goes, cannabis? I said, cannabis. And she stood there for a minute. She goes, do you mean marijuana? I said, well, medical cannabis, I have a prescription from my Dutch physician and I have my prescription with me and I'd like to declare it. And she gave me a form that was like, failure to declare. I was like, no. I need the form that says I'm declaring it because here we are having this conversation. I'm not failing to declare it. I'm declaring it. Do you have that form? And she's like, no. I was like, well, this is screwed. I was like, and then I had a little packet from my January 1995 going to the library and I had customs, current import, export that shows cannabis, see opiates. And then I had the convention. And then I had the psychotropic convention just because you need, and if you're going to go look it up, I already looked it up. Yeah. So here you go. And they didn't know what to do with me and they sent me to secondary. I can imagine. No. And the guy, when I got to secondary, no, he was really nice to me, but
they're just like, holy shit, this is like a law case we're about to, yeah.
No, it was. I was trying to see if I could fight for my thing. So what then I did is he brought me through, he carried my bags for me. It was hilarious. And he walked me through. He's like, good luck. And cause he was like, what is it you're trying to declare? I said, my medical cannabis. And he put it through and I had one of LV's cans and you could see it because it was steel. And he looked at it, he goes, what's that? I said, that's the medical cannabis can that they send to the people that get it legally. She gave me one. There's nothing in it, but my medicine's right there. And he was like, took it down. He's like, no, this is not happening today. And just walked me through and I got out and I was like, woo, it was like crazy. So then I went home to San Diego and I opened the San Diego Compassion Club and I didn't do it with money though. I had money, but I was donated material because Richard Davis and my friends at Grew and me would donate material to people that were sick. And it was more of a statement. And the city of Los Angeles, San Diego at the time, passed a resolution that like I was speaking at with San Diego Normal. And we were trying so hard on every level to push any way we could to get anyone to listen to us being rational. And it was a lot of work, but I started the Compassion Club and I was on the news and everything. And then I tried to go start one in Rhode Island and I got busted in Ohio in July of 95 with 30 pounds of weed marked not for sale, medical use only. And they held me on like 150 grand bond. And then the USA Today wrote an editorial about me saying, Todd McCormick left his house to help sick people. The only problem is the help he intended to deliver is illegal. And then it ended their editorial saying sick people deserve help, not a ticket to jail. And that kind of blew my little story up. And when I went for my arraignment, I had a public pretender who was a fucking idiot. And I didn't like what he was saying. I'm chained. And the judge, who was kind of cool, said, Mr. McCormick, I see you over there. He goes, you got something to say? I stood up and I said, yes, Your Honor. Everything they're portraying me as is wrong. I'm running a compassion club in San Diego. The city knows about it. I have their permission. We donate medicine. It's all free. I was like, this isn't, and he was like, can you prove it? And I was like, yes, I can. In my office in San Diego, I was into multicolored paper at the time, because when I would table and I'd have all white paper, people would just judge it on the format. But if I had one of every color, they'd take one of every color and I'd put together a little, like, you have all of them now. Go read this shit. Go fucking help out change things. And I know it sounds funny, but I could call what it was. So I knew which ones were media, yellow, and I knew which ones were like documents that were like red. And so I was going through it.
Your case.
Well, no, I had them bring them up to the judge. Because, dude, it was like city resolutions. It was news articles about the Compassion Club. And it was my prescription. And I was like, I have a prescription for medical cannabis, and you have to acknowledge it. It supersedes federal law, which supersedes state law. And if you're going to sit here and tell me I got to abide by the law, you should too.
And what'd they say?
He said, tell your client that we didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday. And he looked at me and he said, Mr. McCormick, can you get an American doctor to validate your Dutch physician's prescription? I said, yes, sir. And he says, do so and I'll let you use it. And then he turned to the prosecutor. He said, where's this cannabis? And the prosecutor was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he was like, hold on to it, because I don't want anything to happen to it if he needs to use it as medicine. And the guy was like, unbelievable. And the news reporter from the Toledo Blade, Margie Farm, she ended up being really nice. She talked to my mom and then talked to my doctors and knew it was all legit. And she was listening to all this. And she held the story. It was right before the USA Today dropped it on Monday, but she held off on it. And then USA Today dropped it, and then she dropped it in the Toledo Blade. And the judge didn't know what to do, because on Friday, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, Dr. Todd McCormick, and Dr. John Morgan. Dr. John Morgan was from Mount Sinai. He wrote the book Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts, now passed away. Todd McCormick was California Medical Association, and Dr. Lester Grinspoon's Harvard. They all know me personally and wrote letters of recommendation. And Dr. John Morgan called the FDA and said, American goes to Europe, gets prescribed a drug that's a Schedule 1 here. Can they bring it back? They said, yeah, 90-day supply. He said, okay, thanks. Wrote to the judge. It's most certainly legal. And basically, here's my contact at the government if you need to clarify. And the judge was like, fuck, get this kid out of my face. My bond went from 150 grand to 2. And my public pretender came in and said, you got to leave. We're going to come back and we're going to have motion to dismiss, but you got to just go away. And I was like, I'll go back to California.
Obviously, you don't take the weed with you.
No, I asked him immediately for the weed, and he goes, you know what? I looked into this, and I'm not your civil attorney. You got to sue them separately. I only have to handle you.
And then it gets into a whole thing of hilarious. Like, yeah, are you going to go down that where they might then get a vendetta against you if you go that route? I mean,
well, no. Listen, we got released from jail, went and hung out with our friends from Omaha who have a band called 311, and then bailed Ohio and drove right back to San Diego. And then I had to go back for a motion to dismiss, and the New York Times, which you can go online and read this stuff, it's still online. They did a story about me after the USA Today. It was in the news a lot at that point, and they because of that, 60 Minutes wanted to interview me, and they were going to do a piece on the High Times Cannabis Cup. Kenny's technically a part of it too, and they went to the High Times event in 95. So High Times flew me out, offered to fly me out and put me up if I would show around Morley Schaefer. And I was like, sure, bring him to my doctor and show him around coffee shops. It was a good time, actually. And so that's the flight me and Soma went on when we moved there, because I ended up not coming back, because when I went out there in October, I asked my public defender to ask for my passport back, and he said he's not going to give it to you. You can't go to Europe. You're on bond. And I was like, you ask him or I'll ask him. And he was like, oh, okay, really? So he got up and he turned and looked at me with the judge to him. And he says, Your Honor, Mr. McCormick would like his passport returned so he can go to Amsterdam. And Your Honor says, granted.
Damn.
And he turns around and he goes, do you know Amsterdam's in Europe? He goes, I've been to the Rijksmuseum. I know where it is. Yes, I'm very familiar. And he was like, and I was just like, thank you. Because he already knew in his head he was going to dismiss the case. They said that they dismissed it because my curtains, which is why they pulled me over, they said they were closed. But in the video, it showed that they were open 9 inches, which would facultate the use of the rearview mirror. So he threw out the whole case and all the weed and the hash.
Man, what a blessing, that whole thing, how it came together. And a mythical figure in cannabis, Soma. What's he like? I mean,
me and Soma have been best friends for a long time.
Yeah,
I first met him in Oregon with Jack in '94.
He's like a bigger than life persona, though, the way he looks, and he's from New York, right, or something. Yeah. And you find out like this guy that you would think is like Amsterdam born and bred breeder, grower, like mythical figure. You find out he had to flee, the Northeast, and it's just, he's like one of those guys that I always was like, wow, Soma, that's crazy.
Me and Soma have been besties. I actually stayed at his flat for a month in Amsterdam in January of '95 before I got my own apartment. And I don't know, Soma and I just vibe easy. We've known each other for a long time.
Another badass breeder, right? Would you consider that, or what would you consider his legacy?
He's passionate about cannabis for sure. I mean, Soma, absolutely. He lives it. He collects a lot of things. He's an eclectic person, and absolutely loves cannabis by far. I mean, I would, he's like a brother to me in all reality. I mean, it's hard for me to other than say something nice, I can't think of
What about the original? I just want to talk about just a few topics before the original blueberry that a lot of us know as blueberry. Like, where's that work? Like, some of these strains, are they gone, you think?
Well, I don't know. DJ Short, I met in Amsterdam many moons ago. We didn't hang out much. He was older than me. And, I don't know. He was, I don't know. He I feel like I was with Jack in the Riff Raff, even though Jack was his own celebrity. We were just like, we were loud. We were smoking everywhere. We were just, and he was more like classy, like slip away. And I never got to know him really well. And I've smoked his stuff. And I mean, not to sound like I don't like the fruity stuff. I think it's cool, but it doesn't hit me the same way, like what I smoked, like Northern Lights and then the Hazes. They hit me different. And the fruity varieties that we now call dessert, which is where I would squarely put blueberry, it's flavorful. Very close, yeah. It's tasty. It's absolutely probably part of the lineage of wedding cakes and things like that. We don't know where they came from completely. This is why I'm a big supporter of DNA testing and trying to get a better understanding of what we have. But it never rang my bell like Haze did. Like, first time I smoked something with Haze in it, I was just like, we got to be friends. That shit was like morning coffee in a world of sedatives. And I just didn't even know it was an option. What about Super Skunk? I grew up in Florida, right? In Central Florida. And we used to get a strain called Super Skunk. And then I realized some of my buddies in New Smyrna and other areas, they would call it Surfer Crippy. I always thought that it goes back to a Northern Lights skunk cross in the 80s because Big Bud and Super Skunk, because things like Northern Lights 2 that I know now absolutely lays on the body and the vigor. And because they're not related, this is where the dissimilar cannabis really becomes an important factor, because what Greg had and what Skunkman Sam had really didn't have any overlap. So one of the beautiful things on my website when it comes to the IBLs is there's no Northern Lights in the skunk. There's no Haze in the Northern Lights, or no Haze in the skunk. They're all very different. The Durban's Durban. The Congo's Congo. It isn't all mushed together and then relabeled. And, this is preservation work, but then there's also me making stuff, doing my own selections and fucking playing scientist. And then either I like the combination or I don't. Either I want to smoke it or I don't. There's varieties I make that I want to smoke in the morning, amps me up, makes me feel awake, whatever, clarifies my mind. And there's shit like this I'm starting to smoke, which is Kush crosses and mixes that are more relaxing and chill out and sit in a hot tub type of stuff. What would be the most current genetics be able to recreate that? Meaning, do you think that there's any breeders or anything available on the market right now that would be the close to what we used to remember as Surfer Crippy or Super Skunk? Some of those Northern Lights. I know you have some stuff going, but one of what's funny is, what I'm going to do now is go home and cross NL2 at Skunk One and come back to you with that. Because in all reality, it worked, y'all. This whole podcast, it worked. I talked him into it. But what's interesting I've been doing is I have all of these, what I call like clone only cultivars, premium cuts, OG Kush, Saudi, Trainwreck, Platinum, Godfather. I could go on and on. And I've collected them just because I could. Like, they'd be in front of me, I'd be like, and they'd be from verified source, great. And then I grow it, authenticate it. If it's Trainwreck, like I remember it, I still have it. And this is what I always have done. So I have a collection of all these clone only cultivars. And then when I started playing with Greg's genetics, the purest indica, in my humble opinion, like when I got it tested and it came out almost exactly the same cannabinoids and terpenes as the OG Kush, blew my mind. And I always suspected that the purest indica was a granddaddy or a grandfather of things like OG Kush and ChemDog and these lines. But I never had the purest indica, you know what I mean? I didn't have an assumption of it. I always wondered what it was. When I sent OG Kush seeds to Greg that were crossed with Haze and stuff, I asked him before, did you ever smoke real OG Kush? Because I've been fucking around with Haze in my cuttings for a long time, years from 2012 until I started Authentic Genetic Seeds in 2018. And so I was already making crosses with this stuff and playing with On Haze, which was a cross between Neville's Haze and my original Haze, because I wanted to up the Haze, like in rock and more rolling, more cowbell, more Haze, everything more Haze.
And he was like, no, I haven't, or
well, Greg had said, yeah, it reminds me of Northern Lights #2.
Interesting.
And I was like, interesting. And then when I got what was purest indica NL2 and NL5, I think if you were to grow it, you'd see the same thing. And what's really interesting is the leaf morphology is unbelievable. Like I've had leaves that look like duckfoot, and it's they're the widest leaves I've ever seen. But duckfoot is a narrow, wide leaf. I know it sounds weird, but it's more like a middle leaf that's got it looks more like a duckfoot that goes to narrower toes. This shit's wide as fuck. If there's a picture of it on my website, you could check out. And it's just fascinating. It's under the NL2 and it grows really fast and vigorous, and the buds are huge, and it's just a monster plant. And
you think Sour Diesel came out of that?
It's hard to tell. And this is
now when you're talking about the leaf structure, it reminds me of some of the sours I've seen in the past.
Well, I have the Sour Diesel cutting that I collected a long time ago, and I've been growing it for a long time. What I'm going to do is work with Kevin McKernan and Medical Genomics, because they're still doing DNA testing, because everybody kind of said F you to Phylos. And what they're trying to do with DNA testing, I think, is really cool. And I support it. I don't think what Phylos did was cool. I don't think deceiving your investors or telling your investors one thing and then telling the people that you're selling your product to, the breeders and people that are using your services, another thing, was cool. And I get why there was some, anxiety between them and their customer base. But that said, it's still DNA testing, and it's fascinating. When you go look at the clone groups, it's quite telling, because it shows these groups of plants that have come in, like OG Kush, for instance, 92 times under 80 different names. And it really shows either the confusion or the blatant ability to bullshit that's in our current industry. And this is also goes back to authentic genetics. Believe it or not, I've had the idea for that name in 97 when I was in Amsterdam, in 96, because when I came back and I had all these seeds, that's what I was going to call what I was doing, because meeting Rob and meeting David and meeting Mel Frank and old Ed and getting this like better understanding of what I now call the primary colors and where they came from, it made it all make more sense. And I feel like now bringing these to market, it gives people the ability to go back to Haze, go back to good old skunk, go back to the Northern Lights, even go back to the purest indica, and now build again. Because, for the last 35 years, most of the breeding has been done for speed and for weight, and instead of quality. And like, this isn't the most biggest bud, but the quality, the smoke,
exceptional.
Thank you very much.
And like you said, it's an inverse. You get one without the other. You don't get both. And in the rarest occasions, you get sometimes a good high amount of both.
Well, let me say this though. You know what? I could smoke NL2 and purest indica all day long. They're absolutely stunning, but they're quick as shit. And
are they big producers?
Huge. I mean, biggest buds I ever saw was purest indica. And
so there is some crossover between production and
you get bud rot, because the buds get so big in my greenhouse that it was an issue. But no, in all reality, man, the quality back then is very little different from you smoke real Haze, that shit'll knock your socks off better than moderns.
I can't wait to roll another one up.
This is all yours. And I'll bring you more. I mean, I don't sell or anything weed, but I'm happy to share. It's so nice to turn people onto it, because most of the time they're like, what the fuck?
I love it. I love unique stuff, and I love unique stories, and like it's honestly been my pleasure to be able to sit down with you on this and be able to do this long form and have these conversations like we've had. And I'm a fan of the industry and the players that are in it, so it's just cool for me to get a lot of this history and some of this knowledge about the waves of strains, because it's so cyclical, right? So if you look at our history, you'll see our future, right? Yeah. Hopefully. And hopefully we can mitigate these pitfalls of losing some of these genetics and giving up quality for quantity. And so just all these different pitfalls as we walk through this together.
Well, now we can reimagine cannabis going back to the primary colors and reimagine the colors for quality over quantity. And now I think the longer flowering crayons, like I mentioned, crayons number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 can now be discovered, and the terpenes is expressed, and then the minor cannabinoids discovered, because there's so much more that we can be experiencing and learning. Because Dr. Lester Grinspoon used to have this dream that you'd be able to go in and get your endocannabinoid system tested, and they'd say, oh, you're deficient in this, this, and this, and you'd be able to pull those terpenes or pull those cannabinoids, so to speak, off the shelf and give it to him and balance you out, because it's all about homeostasis, just balance at the end of the day. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, cannabis plays this majorly important role in the human existence, and everybody has an endocannabinoid system. That's why my next book is From Cancer to Cannabis, the essential guide to the endocannabinoid system. And I have Robert Clark is one of my contributors. He wrote me a 20,000 word piece on terpenes as medicine. It's phenomenal. And put that recipe about hemp seed, because you can grind up your cannabis, put it in a jar, pour in hemp seed oil, allow it to soak. It'll dissolve the trichromes. You can throw away the cannabis, and you can have the oil, which is now phyto-cannabinoid enriched hemp seed oil. It's a great way to make your own medicine at home in your own refrigerator. Yeah.
I mean, it's been a pleasure, Todd, honestly. And it's cool for people who watch the pod, just to go into, there's a bookcase behind me. And this is something that I feel like a lot of people that consider themselves somewhat cannabis educators or have been bestowed upon, like carrying somewhat of a torch of like, hey, this is what I think. These books represent that. And I slowly, you've seen from the first pods, I switch them out. But a lot of the guys that we've mentioned and some of the convos we had off the mic, which is a thing we do before and after the pod that we film, that's only available on our website. But yeah, it's some of these books, and I love curating this list because as I learn more about our space and our history, I add books. And then as the market evolves, I take things out. Okay, we had all smuggling books. Now I'm going into packaging design, logo design, because it's so important, and which books I've utilized that I thought, ooh, this is an inspiring piece. And now same thing with cultivators and legacy breeders and guys who paved the way for where we are today, because it's easy everyone talks about the bottleneck in genetics, and everyone's growing LCG and everyone's growing runts. But what are we doing to make sure that doesn't continue? And what are we doing to preserve genetics? And it's like, I love the part you've played and all these guys we talked about today. I'm just happy to be here with you, Todd, and honestly just happy to carry the torch, right? And be able to have you on the pod and say, like, here's an epic conversation I had with an OG legacy guy.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I think what you're doing is great. Advocacy is what it's all about. This is better than sitting in Kinko's all night when you're tired, reprinting Jack's book 1,000 times, because
I've had a lot of jobs. This is the best one so far.
Well, I wish you many more. And, I think what you're doing, highlighting some of this is absolutely beautiful. I was with Howard Marks when he got the Cannabis Culture Award back in 2014. You can look at the video. I'm sitting with him across from him. Actually, it was Ben Dronkers who presented it to him. Ben has been trying to preserve culture with the Cannabis Culture Awards. And there's some really great people in their histories, like Hank DeVries, Jack Hara, Eagle Bill, and Howard Marks, myself. And
what
others.
A book, though, Mr. Nice, for anyone listening.
Yes,
we gotta read it. If you're a cannabis enthusiast or a smuggling enthusiast, or if you like all those mafia movies, just all that stuff, this is for sure for
as
you.
he says, all I really did was bring something where it was to where it wasn't.
Yeah, in massive amounts, hard to fathom amounts.
No, it's beautiful, and I love that you also have Orange Sunshine. I did about 2.5 years with Nick Sand, who made Orange Sunshine with Tim Scully. There's a wonderful documentary called Sunshine Makers available. He passed away about 10 years ago. He was a phenomenal guy. He was a prodigy chemist. They were making the LSD up in Richmond. He's an amazing guy. I miss him. We did time together at Terminal Island. We did sweats together. And psychedelics was something I did a lot through the 80s when I was going through my last bout of cancer. And I think it really helped me. And I was selling mushrooms and acid, and I was a little psychedelic kid. But now when you see the research about people using psilocybin one time and it curing lifelong depression, I wonder sincerely in my heart how much of a role psychedelics positively played in my life. When I was going through the last time I had it, it was like forming in the marrow, and it blows your bone out and it hurts so much. And, also felt like, fuck, my life's over. I'm just going to keep getting it. What's the point? I wanted to go to college, go to Brown University and be a doctor. And then I was just like, fuck this, I'm going to go to the beach. And I ended up dropping out of high school because I wanted to study cannabis, but you can't learn what I wanted to know in school.
Jeez.
So I had to do it elsewhere. And this is why a lot of these guys...
Psychedelics help with so much. PTSD, we're seeing it with like Sean Ryan's show. He talks about it with, it is criminal to deprive quality of life for so many people.
Dude, have you seen Hoffman's Potion? It's a Canadian public broadcasting documentary on Albert Hoffman's life. And there's not a hippie in it. It's absolutely awesome. It's available for free. It's about an hour long. It's on YouTube. It's all about when he basically released LSD to the world, and these psychiatrists were getting it and they were giving it to people here in LA. There was a really good article back in '97 on the LA Weekly, and it had Cary Grant and a psychedelic background. And it said Cary Grant on acid, and other stories from Dr. Oscar Janelger, who is a psychiatrist who was given LSD to people like Anita Snin and Cary Grant and others back then, and helping them through their world issues. And it was phenomenal. And the article was very positive. And, psychedelics have played a really incredible role. And I still feel that they do. And, that's why I was really happy and made a comment on that. It's wonderful to see that up on your list of things that people should read.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. And where can people get a hold of you, Todd? They love the podcast, or they want to know about seeds and genetics and old landrace stuff and questions and
authentic genetics. I'm at agseedco.com. AG for authentic genetics.
That's the plug, guys.
Nice
and I'm
easy.
not just saying that, man. That is the plug. I'm telling you, I've been around and I always look up genetics. I have stuff that I brought back from Amsterdam, allegedly. Big Buddha seeds and all kinds of cheese crosses and senseeds and TH seeds. And
Adam,
I feel like we've lost so much because even like old genetics I've tried to chase down, it's the mom and dad must be different because what I'm seeing in progenies is different. But I can vouch this is the real deal, and Todd's the real deal, man. It's been my pleasure, bro. Thank you, Todd. Honestly, for this 4-hour convo and 2 hours before. And I feel like I'm a better person and a better cannabis enthusiast because of it. But first smoke of the day, family. If you don't know, we record before and after on fsotd.com. We dive into genetics, sometimes a little more relaxed. We have different convos, but check out Todd McCormick's genetics and, roll another one. First smoke of the day. We're out.
Cheers.
Oh shit, I lost the link. Oh, it's right here. If you like this episode, watch more. Click right here.
Right here.